The stagecoach door swung open, and Caleb Rowan's last hope stepped into the Nebraska dust. He'd gambled everything on a mail-order bride, a stranger from Boston who knew nothing about ranching, drought, or the foreclosure notice burning a hole in his pocket. 3 weeks. That's all the time left before the bank seized his father's legacy. But as Evelyn Hart's intelligent eyes swept across the failing ranch, something flickered in her expression that looked dangerously like recognition, like she'd seen broken things before and knew exactly how to fix them. Welcome to a story of redemption, hidden talents, and unexpected love on the American frontier. Stay until the end to see how one woman's secret past becomes the key to saving everything. And comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of Evelyn Hart's arrival, Caleb Rowan stood in front of the cracked mirror in his bedroom and tried to convince himself he didn't look like a man drowning. He'd shaved carefully, nicking his jaw only once. He'd put on his cleanest shirt, though the collar was frayed and the fabric had been washed so many times it had gone soft and thin. His hands, no matter how hard he'd scrubbed them, still bore the permanent stains of ranch work, dirt under the nails, calluses across the palms, rope burns that never quite healed. He looked like what he was, a 28-year-old rancher fighting a losing battle against debt, drought, and his own inexperience. "You're a damn fool," he told his reflection. The face that stared back offered no argument. 3 months ago, in a moment of whiskey-fueled desperation, he'd answered an advertisement in the Boston Evening Transcript, a matrimonial agency specializing in connecting genteel Eastern ladies with enterprising Western gentlemen. The language had been flowery, the promises grand, and Caleb, sitting alone in a ranch house that echoed with absence, had written a letter that was equal parts honesty and fantasy, seeking a capable woman to share a life of hard work and honest reward. Ranch in Nebraska Territory offers clean air, open sky, and opportunity for those brave enough to build something lasting. He'd said nothing about the mounting debts, nothing about the cattle he'd lost to disease last winter, nothing about the fact that he was 3 weeks away from losing everything his father had built. The response had come faster than he'd expected. Miss Evelyn Hart, 26 years old, educated, refined, seeking a new beginning in a land of possibility. Her letter had been beautifully written, her penmanship flawless. She'd included a photograph, a formal studio portrait showing a woman with dark hair, serious eyes, and the kind of composed expression that made Caleb's stomach tighten with anxiety. She looked too good for this place. Too good for him. But he'd sent the train fare anyway, because desperation made gamblers of honest men. Now, standing in the dusty main street of Ashford Creek, population 200 and dropping, Caleb watched the stagecoach roll toward the depot and wondered what the hell he'd been thinking. Around him, the town gathered in loose clusters, pretending they had business on the street, but really just curious to see what kind of woman would be desperate or foolish enough to marry a failing rancher she'd never met. "Heard she's from Boston," Tom Hendricks said, leaning against the post outside his mercantile. "Real city lady." "Won't last a month?" his wife Margaret added, not unkindly. "This territory eats city folk alive." Caleb kept his eyes on the coach and tried to ignore the sick certainty that they were right. The stage pulled to a stop in a cloud of dust that made several onlookers step back, coughing. The driver, a weathered man named Jesse who'd been running this route for 15 years, climbed down and opened the passenger door with exaggerated ceremony. "Miss Hart," he announced, "Ashford Creek, Nebraska Territory." For a moment, nothing happened. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. Then a gloved hand appeared, accepting Jesse's assistance, and Evelyn Hart stepped down into the street. The first thing Caleb noticed was that she was taller than he'd expected. The second was that the photograph hadn't done her justice, or perhaps it had been too kind. She wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her mouth too wide, her eyes too direct, but there was something arresting about her, a quality of intense presence that made it impossible to look away. She wore a traveling suit of deep blue wool, already dusty from the journey, but still obviously expensive. Her dark hair was pinned up beneath a small hat, and despite hours in a cramped stagecoach, she stood with perfect posture, her gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd with the calm assessment of a general surveying a battlefield. When her eyes found Caleb, she didn't smile. She simply held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then began walking toward him. The crowd parted automatically. "Mr. Rowan," she said when she reached him. Her voice was lower than he'd imagined, touched with the crisp consonants of educated Boston. "I'm Evelyn Hart." "Ma'am." Caleb snatched his hat off his head, suddenly aware of how rough he must look to her refined eyes. Welcome. Welcome to Ashford Creek." "Thank you." She glanced around the street, taking in the false-fronted buildings, the rutted dirt road, the handful of curious onlookers. If she was disappointed by what she saw, her expression didn't show it. "It's smaller than I expected." "Yes, ma'am. It's not much of a town yet. But it's growing, slowly." "All things worth having grow slowly, Mr. Rowan." She turned those direct eyes back to him. "Is that your wagon?" He followed her gaze to where his flatbed wagon stood, hitched to his 2 most reliable horses. It wasn't much. The wood was weather-worn, one wheel had a pronounced wobble, but it was clean. He'd spent an hour that morning making sure of it. "Yes, ma'am, the ranch is about 6 miles out. If you're ready, I'd like to collect my trunk first." Of course, of course." Caleb turned to where Jessie was already unloading luggage. There were 2 pieces, a large steamer trunk and a smaller case. Both bore the marks of quality craftsmanship and looked profoundly out of place in the dusty street. Caleb hefted the trunk, trying not to grunt with the effort. Whatever was inside was heavy. Books, probably. City folk always brought too many books. "I can manage the case," Evelyn said, picking it up before he could protest. "Shall we?" The ride out to the ranch was the longest 6 miles of Caleb's life. Evelyn sat beside him on the wagon seat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't clutch the seat or gasp when the wagon jolted over ruts. She simply swayed with the movement, her eyes on the landscape rolling past. "The land is flatter than I expected," she said after the first mile of silence. "Yes, ma'am. We're on the prairie here. Some hills to the west where the ranch is, but mostly it's flat. Good for farming. Can be, if the rain comes. And if you know what you're doing." She glanced at him. "And do you know what you're doing, Mr. Rowan?" The question was direct enough to sting. "I'm learning," he said carefully. "My father, he knew the land, knew ranching. I'm trying to follow what he built." "When did he pass?" "Year and a half ago. Heart gave out one night. He was 53. I'm sorry." "Thank you, ma'am." Another silence settled between them. Caleb searched desperately for something to say, some way to make conversation that wouldn't reveal how completely out of his depth he was. But Evelyn spoke first. "You should know something, Mr. Rowan. I'm not particularly good at dissembling, so I'll be direct. I came west because I needed to leave Boston. My circumstances there became untenable. This arrangement, our arrangement, represents an opportunity for me to begin again. I intend to make the most of it." Caleb blinked, unsure how to respond to such frank honesty. "I appreciate your directness, ma'am." "Do you? Most men find it off-putting." "I'm not most men." The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "No, I don't suppose you are." They crested a low rise and the Rowan Ranch came into view. Caleb felt his stomach drop, seeing it through her eyes. The main house was a simple 2-story structure, weathered gray by wind and sun. The barn leaned slightly to the left, its roof patched in 3 places. The corral fences needed mending. The vegetable garden his mother had once maintained was overgrown with weeds. Beyond it all, the rolling grassland stretched toward distant hills, marked by clusters of cattle that looked smaller and fewer than they should have been. It looked like what it was, a struggling operation held together by determination and prayer. "Home," he said quietly, the word tasting like defeat. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Then, "How much land?" 640 acres, a full section. "Water rights?" "Creek runs through the northeast corner, spring-fed, never goes dry." "Cattle count?" Caleb hesitated. "About 80 head currently, should be closer to 200. "What happened to the rest?" "Disease last winter, lost most of the herd. I'm rebuilding, but it's slow going." "And the buildings? They're structurally sound?" "The house is solid. Barn needs some work. Rest of it, well, it's not pretty, but it functions." Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes moving across the property with the same careful assessment she'd given the town. Caleb braced himself for disappointment, for the inevitable comparison between this rough reality and whatever fantasies she'd harbored about frontier life. Instead, she said, "I'd like to see the account books." "I'm sorry?" "Your financial records, ledgers, receipts, outstanding debts. I'd like to review them this evening, if possible." Caleb nearly drove the wagon off the road. "Why would you, that is, those aren't really Mr. Rowan?" She turned to face him fully, and there was something sharp and alive in her eyes that he hadn't seen in the photographs. "We are entering into a partnership, whether either of us fully realized it or not. I am not a fool, and I will not be treated as decorative. If this ranch is struggling, and it clearly is, then I need to understand the scope of the problem before I can help solve it. With respect, ma'am, ranching is not my area of expertise clearly, but business is. Or rather, was." Her jaw tightened slightly. "My father was a financial advisor in Boston. He managed accounts for some of the wealthiest families in New England. I assisted him for 8 years before his death. I understand profit margins, debt ratios, and resource allocation. I may not know cattle, Mr. Rowan, but I know numbers, and from what I've observed already, your numbers need attention." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. In the sudden silence, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat. "Your father," he said slowly, "he taught you business?" "He taught me everything. He had no sons, and I had no interest in embroidery." Her expression softened slightly. "I realize this is not what you expected. You wanted a wife who would cook and clean and ask no questions about matters beyond the domestic sphere. I can cook and clean adequately, Mr. Rowan, but I can also read a balance sheet, negotiate with creditors, and identify inefficiencies in operational structure. If you're willing to let me try, I might be able to help you save this place." Caleb stared at her, this strange, direct woman from Boston, who looked at his failing ranch and saw puzzles to solve rather than dreams to abandon. Something loosened in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. "The books are a mess," he admitted. "I've tried to keep them, but my father's system didn't make much sense, and I haven't had time to organize them properly." "Then we'll organize them together." She gathered her skirts and prepared to step down from the wagon. "But first, I believe you promised me a tour of my new home." The house tour took 20 minutes, during which Evelyn asked questions about everything from the well depth to the condition of the chimney. She examined the kitchen with particular attention, noting the cast iron stove, the pantry's shelving, the hand pump that brought well water directly into the house, a luxury Caleb's mother had insisted upon. "Your mother had good sense," Evelyn observed, running her hand along the pump handle. "She was a practical woman, had to be, married to a rancher." "Where is she now?" "Died when I was 16. Fever took her fast." "I'm sorry." Evelyn moved to the window, looking out over the overgrown garden. "She planted this?" "Every spring. Vegetables, herbs, even some flowers. After she died, Pa let it go. I tried to maintain it the first year after he passed, but he trailed off, the excuse dying unspoken. But you were trying to save the ranch and had no time for gardens." "Yes, ma'am." "Evelyn," she said, turning to face him, "if we're to be married, you should call me Evelyn." The name felt strange in his mouth. "Evelyn, and you should call me Caleb." "Very well, Caleb." She removed her hat, setting it on the kitchen table. Her dark hair was starting to come loose from its pins, and there was dust on her cheek. She looked tired but alert, her eyes still moving, still cataloging. "I'd like to wash up and change out of these traveling clothes. Then we can discuss the books before dinner. Unless you have other plans?" Caleb almost laughed. Plans? As if he'd had plans beyond hoping she wouldn't turn around and demand to be taken back to town immediately. "No plans," he said. "I'll show you to your room." He led her upstairs to the bedroom that had been his mother's sewing room, and before that, a guest room that had never seen many guests. He'd cleaned it 3 times in the past week, changed the linens twice, placed wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. The flowers were wilted now, their heads drooping sadly. Evelyn set down her small case and looked around the simple space. "It's perfect," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "Wash basins there, fresh water in the pitcher. I'll bring up your trunk." "Thank you, Caleb." He was halfway to the door when she spoke again. Caleb, I want you to know I meant what I said in my letters. I'm here to build something lasting. I don't give up easily. He turned to find her standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light. For the first time since the stagecoach had arrived, he allowed himself to truly hope. Neither do I, he said. An hour later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, surrounded by ledgers, receipts, and papers that documented 18 months of barely controlled chaos. Evelyn had changed into a simple dress of brown cotton, practical and unadorned. Her hair was pinned up more loosely now, and she'd rolled up her sleeves. She looked, Caleb thought, like a woman preparing for battle. She picked up the first ledger, his father's careful handwriting marching across pages in neat columns, and began to read. Caleb watched her eyes move across the numbers, watched her fingers trace lines of calculation, watched her expression shift from concentration to concern to something that might have been anger. After 10 minutes of silence, she looked up. Caleb, when was the last time you paid the mortgage? His chest tightened. 3 months ago. I've been trying to scrape together enough for the next payment, but how much do you owe in total? $1,500. Original loan was $2,000, taken out by my father 5 years ago to expand the herd. Current income? I sold some cattle in July, brought in $200. Operating expenses? Between feed, supplies, the hired hand I let go in May, he swallowed hard. About $70 a month. Evelyn set down the ledger and steepled her fingers, her expression unreadable. And the bank? What have they said? Mr. Cartwright, he's the bank president. He's given me until the 1st of next month to bring the account current. That's 3 weeks from now. I need to come up with $450, or he's going to foreclose. $450 in 3 weeks. She said it calmly, as if he'd announced the weather forecast. With current livestock numbers and market prices, that's impossible through cattle sales alone. I know. Are there other assets? Equipment you could sell? Land you could lease? I've sold everything I can spare. The horses are necessary for working the cattle. The wagon's falling apart, but I need it for hauling. The equipment is all essential. Evelyn stood and walked to the window, her arms crossed. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but firm. Your father was a good rancher, Caleb. I can see that in these records. He understood cattle, understood the land, but he was a terrible businessman. Caleb bristled. My father built this ranch from nothing, and then nearly destroyed it by over-leveraging, failing to diversify, and keeping records that make it impossible to track actual profit margins. She turned to face him, and her expression was gentle despite her words. I'm not insulting him. Most ranchers are the same way. They know animals and earth and weather, but they don't think like businessmen. They take loans without understanding interest rates. They expand without calculating risk. They pour everything into a single product and pray that prices stay stable. So what would you suggest? He tried to keep the defensiveness out of his voice and mostly failed. Evelyn returned to the table and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. First, we need to understand what we're actually working with. You said 640 acres. How much of that is usable? About 500. The rest is too rocky or steep. And currently it's all cattle pasture? Mostly. There's about 20 acres of hayfield. What about the creek? You said it runs through the property. Northeast corner. Good water, but the land there is lower. Floods sometimes in spring. Evelyn made a note. What grows wild on the property? Grasses mostly, some wildflowers. There's a stand of cottonwoods near the creek and... He paused, remembering. There's an old orchard on the south slope. My grandfather planted it. Apple trees, maybe 30 of them. Are they still producing? Some of them. The fruit's not great, small, kind of tough. Nobody's maintained the trees in years. But they're alive? Still fruiting? I suppose so. I haven't paid much attention. Evelyn's pen moved across the paper in quick, decisive strokes. What else? What do you mean, what else? What other resources exist on this property that you're not currently monetizing? Caleb stared at her. It's a cattle ranch, Evelyn. The resources are grass and water for raising cattle. She looked up and there was something almost excited in her eyes. No, It's 640 acres of land with water rights, existing infrastructure, unused orchards, and apparently a complete inability to think beyond traditional ranching models. I don't understand what your diversification, Caleb. Your father put all his resources into cattle. When disease struck, he lost everything because he had no other income streams. But this property could support multiple enterprises. The orchard could be restored and expanded. The bottomland near the creek could be planted with crops that tolerate wet conditions. The hayfield could be doubled in size. Hay prices are rising with all the new homesteaders moving in. You could even lease portions of the grazing land to neighboring ranchers while you rebuild your herd. Caleb felt dizzy trying to follow her logic. All of that would take money I don't have, capital investment, time. Some of it would, but not all. She pulled out another ledger, this one showing his father's supply purchases. You're buying hay in winter, correct? Yes, from Tom Hendricks in town. At what price? $2 a bale last winter. And how much did you need? About 100 bales. Evelyn's jaw tightened. $200. For hay you could have grown yourself on land you already own. Caleb, that's unconscionable. I didn't have time to... I know, you were focused on the cattle, on doing what your father did. Her expression softened. But that's not working anymore, is it? The truth of it settled over him like a weight. No, it's not. Then let's try something different. She turned the paper around so he could see the notes she'd been making. We have 3 weeks to raise $450. That's our immediate crisis. But beyond that, we need to build a sustainable operation that can weather setbacks and generate reliable income. And how do we do that? Evelyn smiled, and for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she looked genuinely happy. We get creative. Now tell me everything you know about those apple trees. They talked until well past midnight. Caleb made coffee twice and assembled a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and the beef stew he'd left simmering on the stove. They ate without stopping the discussion, papers spread across the table, ideas flowing in a way Caleb had never experienced before. Evelyn asked about every aspect of the ranch: soil quality, seasonal weather patterns, local market prices, competing operations. She asked about the neighbors, the town merchants, the railroad schedule. She asked questions Caleb had never thought to consider and listened to his answers with absolute focus. The apples, she said, returning to that subject for the third time. You said some are still good? Some. Most are wormy or bird-pecked, but there's usually a bushel or two of decent ones each fall. When is harvest? Late September, early October. That's now. They're ripe now. Caleb blinked. I suppose so. I hadn't thought. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we harvest every edible apple on those trees. The good ones we sell fresh in town. The rest we dry. Dry? Dried apples sell for premium prices all winter. City folks pay ridiculous amounts for them. All you need is a way to slice them thin and a clean, dry space to lay them out. She was already making notes. We can use the barn loft. It's warm and well ventilated. Evelyn, selling apples isn't going to raise $450 in 3 weeks. No, but it might raise 50 or 60. Combined with a cattle sale. You said you have about 80 head. Give or take. How many could you sell without compromising the breeding stock? Caleb calculated quickly. Maybe 20 steers. If I keep the best bulls and all the heifers, I could rebuild from there. At current market rates? $15 to $20 a head, depending on weight. That's $300 to $400. Add the apples and we're close. We need one more income source. They both stared at the papers, thinking. The hayfield, Caleb said slowly. There's a second cutting that'll be ready in about 10 days. I was planning to store it for winter, but if I sold it instead, how much could you cut? Maybe 50 bales. At $2 a bale, that's another $100. Evelyn's pen scratched calculations. Cattle sales, $350. Hay, $100. Apples, $60 if we're lucky. That's $510. Enough to make the payment with a small cushion. Enough to buy us time. She looked up, and there was steel in her expression. But Caleb, this only works if we start immediately. The cattle need to be ready for market within 2 weeks to reach the stock buyer before he moves on. The apples need to be picked tomorrow before they rot, or the wildlife gets them all. The hay needs to be cut, dried, and sold before the weather turns. That's a lot of work for one person. Good thing there are two of us now. Caleb studied her across the table. This stranger from Boston, who'd walked into his disaster of a life and immediately started organizing it like a military campaign. You understand what you're signing up for? It's going to be brutal. 14-hour days, physical labor, and no guarantee any of it will work. I understand perfectly. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Do you understand what I'm signing up for? A man I barely know, a failing ranch, a town that probably thinks I'm either desperate or insane. I'm here anyway, Caleb. I'm not going anywhere. Something passed between them in that moment. Not love, not yet, but something just as binding. A recognition of mutual need, mutual determination, mutual refusal to surrender. Tomorrow then, Caleb said. We start tomorrow. Tonight, Evelyn corrected. We start tonight. You're going to show me those apple trees by lantern light so I can assess the size of the crop. Then you're going to teach me how to judge cattle quality so I can help you select which steers to sell. We have 3 weeks to save this ranch, Caleb Rowan. We're not wasting a single hour. She stood, already moving toward the door where a lantern hung. Caleb rose more slowly, exhaustion warring with something that might have been exhilaration. Outside, the prairie night was vast and star-filled. Evelyn walked beside him toward the south slope, sure-footed despite the darkness, her focus absolute. As they approached the old orchard, Caleb could make out the twisted shapes of the apple trees, gnarled and neglected but still alive. Evelyn raised the lantern, studying the nearest tree with the same intensity she'd brought to the ledgers. In the golden light, her profile was sharp and determined, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with fierce intelligence. These trees haven't been pruned in years, she said, but the structure is good. With proper care, they could be productive again. Maybe next year, Caleb said. No, this year we harvest what's here. Next year we make them better. Every year after that we make them better still. She turned to him, and in the lantern light her eyes were bright. That's how you save something, Caleb. Not all at once, but piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. You keep showing up. You keep working. You refuse to let it die. Standing there in the darkness beneath the neglected apple trees, Caleb realized he was looking at his future. Not just the ranch's future, but his own. This woman, this brilliant, relentless stranger, had walked into his life with nothing but determination and an ability to see possibilities where he saw only problems. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not getting back on the stagecoach. Evelyn's expression softened. The night's not over yet. I reserve the right to change my mind if these apples turn out to be terrible. But she smiled when she said it, and Caleb found himself smiling back. They worked until nearly 2 a.m, examining trees, making plans, calculating yields. When they finally returned to the house, Evelyn's dress was streaked with dirt, and her hair had come completely loose, falling around her shoulders. She looked exhausted and exhilarated and entirely unlike the composed woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach that afternoon. At the base of the stairs, she paused. Caleb, about the wedding, when were you thinking? He'd been trying not to think about it at all. Whenever you're ready. There's no rush if you want to, I'd like to do it soon. Not out of any impropriety, she added quickly, but because I want the legal protection. If we're married, the bank can't claim I have no standing to negotiate or make decisions about the ranch. As your wife, I have rights. As your whatever I am now, I'm just a visitor. The practicality of it shouldn't have stung, but it did slightly. I could speak to Reverend Matthews tomorrow, or the next day, whenever you... Tomorrow afternoon, Evelyn said firmly. We'll harvest apples in the morning, marry in the afternoon, and then you can teach me how to judge cattle. We don't have time to waste on prolonged courtships, Caleb. We have a ranch to save. She started up the stairs, then paused again, looking back. And Caleb? I meant what I said earlier. I don't give up easily, on anything, including this. She gestured vaguely between them. Whatever this becomes, I'm here. I'm staying. You should know that. I'm beginning to, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and continued up the stairs. Caleb listened to her footsteps cross the floor above. heard the door to her room close softly. Then he walked back to the kitchen, looked at the papers still spread across the table, numbers and plans and hope sketched out in Evelyn Hart's precise handwriting, and allowed himself something he hadn't felt in 18 months. Possibility. The ranch was still failing, the debt was still crushing, the bank was still circling like a vulture, but now he wasn't alone anymore. Now he had a partner. And she had a plan. Dawn came too early and found them already in the orchard. Caleb had knocked on Evelyn's door at first light, half expecting to find her still asleep, exhausted from travel and the late night of planning. Instead, she'd opened the door fully dressed in a simple work dress she must have packed specifically for labor, her hair braided back, her sleeves already rolled to her elbows. "I've made coffee," she'd said, "and there are biscuits from yesterday. We should eat quickly." Now they moved through the rows of gnarled apple trees, Caleb carrying 2 large baskets while Evelyn examined each tree with systematic precision. The morning air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of dried grass and the faint sweetness of ripening fruit. "This one," Evelyn said, pointing to a particularly heavy-laden branch. "The apples are smaller, but the color is good. No visible worm damage." Caleb set down the baskets and reached up, plucking an apple and biting into it experimentally. The flesh was tart and crisp, nothing like the mealy softness he'd expected. "It's actually good. Your grandfather knew what he was doing when he planted these varieties. They're storage apples, bred to last through winter, which means they'll dry beautifully." She pulled down a branch to inspect it more closely. "Start with this tree. Pick everything that's not obviously damaged. We'll sort for quality later." They worked in companionable silence for the first hour, the only sounds the soft thump of apples dropping into baskets and the occasional call of birds overhead. Caleb found himself watching Evelyn when she wasn't looking, struck by how naturally she moved through the work. She didn't pick daintily or hesitate about reaching into the higher branches. She simply worked, efficient and focused, her hands already stained with apple juice. "You've done this before," he observed. "Picked apples?" "No, but I've worked before. My father believed in the dignity of labor, regardless of social class. He used to say that understanding how things were made gave you respect for their value." She stretched to reach a high cluster of fruit. "I've worked in soup kitchens, helped inventory warehouses, even spent a summer cataloging library books. Physical work doesn't frighten me." "Your father sounds like he was an interesting man." Something flickered across her face, pain, quickly suppressed. "He was. He believed in using wealth responsibly and giving back to the community. He managed money for some of the richest families in Boston, but he never forgot where he came from. His father was a shopkeeper, his grandfather a fisherman. He built everything from nothing." "Like my father," Caleb said quietly. "Yes, like your father." She paused in her picking, looking out across the neglected orchard toward the ranch buildings beyond. "Men like that, they pour everything into building something lasting. But sometimes they forget that what they're building needs to evolve to survive. The world changes. Markets shift. What worked 10 years ago might not work today." "Is that what happened to your father's business?" Evelyn's hand stilled on the branch she'd been reaching for. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she did, her voice was carefully neutral. "My father made decisions he thought were sound. He trusted people he believed were trustworthy. He was wrong on both counts. By the time he realized his mistake, it was too late to fix it. Evelyn, we should keep working. We have 6 more trees to finish before noon if we want to make the wedding on time." The subject was clearly closed, but Caleb had heard enough to understand that whatever had driven Evelyn from Boston, it was wrapped up in her father's legacy and carried a weight of pain she wasn't ready to share. He let it go and returned to picking, but something had shifted between them. She'd offered him a glimpse behind her composed exterior, and he found himself wanting to know more. By mid-morning, they'd filled 8 baskets with apples. Caleb hauled them to the barn while Evelyn began sorting, creating piles based on quality. The best apples, unblemished, good size, perfect color, went into one basket for immediate sale. The rest she divided into groups for drying. "We'll need to slice these," she said, surveying the drying pile. "Thin as possible, all uniform thickness so they dry evenly. Do you have sharp knives?" "In the kitchen, but Evelyn, that's hours of work." "Then we'd better start soon." She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving streaks of dirt and juice. But first we have a wedding to attend. The matter-of-fact way she said it made Caleb's stomach flip. You're sure about this? We could wait, get to know each other better. Caleb. She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. I didn't come all this way to play at being engaged. I came to start a new life, and that life begins today. Unless you've changed your mind? No. No, I haven't changed my mind. Then let's go tell Reverend Matthews we need him this afternoon. The ride into town took 40 minutes, and Caleb spent most of it trying to calm his racing thoughts. He was about to marry a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours. A woman who was brilliant and capable and completely unlike anyone he'd ever met. A woman who looked at his failing ranch and saw solutions instead of defeat. A woman whose past was clearly complicated in ways she wasn't ready to discuss. You're nervous, Evelyn observed as they neared town. Wouldn't you be? Terrified, actually. She glanced at him, a slight smile on her lips. But I find terror tends to sharpen one's focus rather wonderfully. We're doing something unconventional, Caleb. We're building a partnership on necessity and mutual respect rather than romance. Some would say that's backwards. I think it might be the most honest foundation possible. And if we never... He stopped, unsure how to phrase it delicately. Fall in love? She said it without flinching. Then we'll have a successful business partnership and a comfortable domestic arrangement. Many marriages have been built on less. But I'm not convinced love is impossible between us. Unlikely, perhaps. Complicated, certainly. But not impossible. The honesty of it was almost painful. You always say exactly what you're thinking, don't you? I've found that life is too short for pretense. My father taught me that too, though perhaps not in the way he intended. She straightened her shoulders. Now, let's go make this official before I lose my nerve entirely. Reverend Matthews was a kind man in his 60s who'd known Caleb since childhood. He received their request with surprise, but no judgment, merely asking them to wait while he gathered his wife as a witness. Within 30 minutes, they stood in the small church parlor while the Reverend read the marriage ceremony from his worn prayer book. Caleb had expected to feel trapped or panicked. Instead, as he repeated the vows to have and to hold for better or worse, in sickness and health, he felt something closer to relief. Evelyn's hand was steady in his, her voice clear and firm as she made the same promises. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, she looked at Caleb with an expression that was equal parts determination and vulnerability. You may kiss the bride, Reverend Matthews said with a gentle smile. Caleb leaned in carefully, intending a brief, chaste kiss. But Evelyn met him halfway, her lips warm against his, and for just a moment the kiss became something real, something that hinted at possibilities neither of them had dared to name. When they pulled apart, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright. Well then, she said softly, that's done. Mrs. Matthews insisted on serving them tea and cake, delaying their return to the ranch by an hour. The older woman asked Evelyn gentle questions about Boston, about her journey west, carefully avoiding any hint of prying into why a woman of obvious education and refinement had chosen to become a mail-order bride. Evelyn answered graciously, describing the city's architecture and culture without revealing anything personal. Watching her navigate the conversation, Caleb was struck again by how skilled she was at presenting exactly the image she wanted people to see. Poised, pleasant, revealing nothing that might make her vulnerable. It was impressive and slightly sad, this careful control she maintained. They were preparing to leave when Tom Hendricks appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Caleb, I need a word. Privately. Evelyn stood immediately. I'll wait in the wagon. No. Caleb reached for her hand without thinking. Anything Tom needs to say to me, he can say to both of us. Evelyn's my wife now. She has a right to hear this. Tom shifted uncomfortably, his eyes moving between them. Finally, he sighed. It's about the bank. I was there this morning, and I overheard Cartwright talking to his clerk. He's planning to call in your loan early, Caleb. He's not going to wait the full 3 weeks. The bottom dropped out of Caleb's stomach. He can't do that. We have an agreement. Not a written one, apparently. Just his word. And his word isn't worth much when Jameson's offering him cash for the property. Jameson? The name came out like a curse. Marcus Jameson was the largest landowner in the territory, a man who'd built his empire by swallowing up failing ranches and consolidating them into vast holdings. What does he want with my land? Water rights, I'd guess. Your creek feeds into the main river. Control that, and you control irrigation for half the valley. Tom's expression was sympathetic but resigned. I'm sorry, Caleb. I thought you should know what you're up against. Evelyn's hand tightened in Caleb's. When is Cartwright planning to call the loan? End of the week, from what I heard. He'll post the foreclosure notice and give you 72 hours to vacate. That's 4 days, Caleb said numbly. We can't possibly. Yes, we can. Evelyn's voice cut through his panic like a blade. Tom, thank you for the warning. We'll handle it. Evelyn, there's no way to raise that kind of money in 4 days. Then we'll buy more time. She was already moving toward the door, pulling Caleb with her. Come on, we need to visit Mr. Cartwright. Now? Evelyn, we're not ready. We're never going to be ready, but we're going anyway. The Ashford Creek Savings and Loan occupied a narrow building on Main Street, its false front painted an optimistic green. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of paper and leather. A young clerk looked up from his desk as they entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Evelyn. We're here to see Mr. Cartwright, Evelyn said before the clerk could speak. Tell him Mr. and Mrs. Rowan are here regarding the property loan. The clerk hesitated, then disappeared into the back office. They waited in tense silence until a door opened and Edward Cartwright emerged, a portly man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a practiced smile. Caleb, and this must be your bride. Congratulations on your marriage. The warmth in his voice didn't reach his eyes, though I must say, the timing is somewhat surprising. The timing is perfect, Evelyn said smoothly. We're here to discuss the loan extension you promised my husband. Ah, yes, about that. Cartwright gestured toward his office. Perhaps we should speak privately. Here's fine, Evelyn said. This won't take long. Cartwright's smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Rowan, I don't think you understand the delicacy of financial matters. I understand perfectly. You made an agreement to give my husband 3 weeks to bring his account current. That deadline hasn't passed. Yet we've heard you're planning to call the loan early and foreclose on the property. That would constitute a breach of your verbal agreement and could open the bank to legal liability. The silence that followed was profound. Cartwright's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, irritation, calculation. There's no written agreement. Reverend Matthews was present when you made the promise, as were Tom Hendricks and Dr. Warner. All three would testify to what they heard. Evelyn's voice remained pleasant, conversational, but there was steel underneath. Of course, I'm sure you have no intention of breaking your word. You're a respected businessman in this community. Your reputation for fair dealing is surely worth more than a few days' difference in foreclosure timing. Cartwright studied her with new interest, seeing past the refined exterior to the sharp mind beneath. You're very well informed for someone who arrived in town yesterday. I make it a point to learn quickly. Now, about that 3-week extension, we'll need written confirmation of the deadline just to avoid any future misunderstandings. Mrs. Rowan, unless you'd prefer we discuss this matter with the territorial judge, I'm sure the court would be interested in hearing about verbal agreements being violated to facilitate property sales to third parties, especially when those sales benefit the bank's largest depositor. She smiled, and it was razor sharp. I believe Mr. Jameson keeps substantial funds in your institution, doesn't he? The color drained from Cartwright's face. How did you? Public records are wonderfully informative, as is casual conversation with observant shopkeepers. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Shall we draw up that written agreement now? I'd hate for this to become complicated when it could remain so simple. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Cartwright exhaled slowly and nodded to his clerk. Prepare a written extension, 3 weeks from today, as originally agreed. Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. That's very reasonable of you. Evelyn's smile warmed marginally. And I want you to know that we fully intend to make good on this loan. The Rowan Ranch will be profitable again. You have my word on that. I hope you're right, Mrs. Rowan. For all our sakes. They waited while the clerk prepared the document, Evelyn reading it carefully before allowing Caleb to sign. As they walked out into the afternoon sunlight, Caleb felt like he'd just witnessed a magic trick. "What the hell was that?" he asked as soon as they were out of earshot. "Negotiation. Cartwright is a bully and a cheat, but he's not stupid. He knows that if we push this into court, we might lose, but we'll definitely damage his reputation in the process. Small-town bankers live and die by their standing in the community. Threaten that, and suddenly they become reasonable." "You learned all that from your father?" "From watching him work, yes. He always said that most business disputes could be resolved by making the other party more afraid of the consequences of fighting than of compromising." She looked up at him, and there was something vulnerable beneath the confidence. "Did I overstep?" "I know I should have consulted you first." "Overstep. Evelyn, you just saved the ranch." He laughed, slightly dazed. "You've been my wife for 3 hours, and you've already accomplished more than I managed in 18 months. We're not saved yet. We still need to raise the money. But at least now we have our full 3 weeks to do it." She climbed into the wagon, settling her skirts. "And we've wasted enough time in town. Those apples won't slice themselves." They worked until midnight. The barn loft became their processing center, Evelyn directing operations with military precision. She'd brought up every sharp knife from the kitchen, along with clean cloths, baskets, and the breadboards she'd found in the pantry. She showed Caleb how to slice the apples thin and uniform, removing cores but leaving the peels for color. "Talk to me," she said as they worked, their hands moving in steady rhythm. "Tell me about this place, about growing up here." So Caleb talked. He told her about his childhood on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could write, about the year his mother had tried to teach him piano and given up when he kept sneaking out to help with the cattle. He told her about his father's quiet strength, the way he could read weather in the sky and know exactly when to move the herd to new pasture. "He was a good man," Caleb said, his knife moving automatically through an apple. "But you're right, he wasn't a businessman. He thought if you worked hard and treated people fairly, everything else would take care of itself." "That's not entirely wrong," Evelyn said, "but it's not entirely right either. Good character matters, but so does strategy. So does understanding markets and risk. Your father gave you a foundation. Now we're building on it." "We," Caleb repeated. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. This is ours now, Caleb, not just yours. Ours." She looked up from her work, her eyes serious. "I meant those vows today, for better or worse. I'm in this completely, which means you're stuck with me and my opinions and my interference. I'm beginning to think I'm the luckiest man in Nebraska. Ask me again in 6 months when I'm driving you insane with spreadsheets and efficiency improvements." But she smiled when she said it, and Caleb found himself smiling back. They fell into an easy rhythm, conversation flowing naturally between work. Evelyn asked about the neighbors, the town politics, the history of the territory. Caleb asked about Boston, about what she'd left behind, though he was careful not to push when she deflected certain questions. "My father died 6 months ago," she said at one point, unprompted. "That's when everything fell apart. People he'd trusted, people we'd considered friends, they turned on him. On us. There were accusations, investigations, newspaper articles." Her hands never stopped slicing. "None of it was his fault. He'd been deceived by his business partner, a man he'd known for 20 years. But by the time the truth came out, my father was dead and our reputation was destroyed. I'm sorry." "So am I. Sorry that he didn't live to see his name cleared. Sorry that I didn't have the courage to stay and fight. I ran, Caleb. I saw an advertisement for a matrimonial agency and I ran halfway across the country to escape the whispers and the stares." "That's not running. That's surviving." She looked up and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Is it? Because sometimes I'm not sure I know the difference anymore." Caleb set down his knife and reached across the workspace to take her hand. "You came here and immediately started fighting to save a ranch you'd never seen, to help a man you'd never met. That's not the action of a coward, Evelyn. That's courage. Or stubbornness. I'll take stubborn over defeated any day." She squeezed his hand, then released it and returned to work. "Tell me about the cattle, the ones we're going to sell. How do you choose which ones to let go?" They talked through the night, slicing hundreds of apples and spreading them on clean cloths across the loft floor. By dawn, every horizontal surface was covered with thin apple slices, and both of them were exhausted, their hands cramped and sticky. "Tomorrow we start on the cattle," Evelyn said, surveying their work with satisfaction. "And I need to visit the mercantile, see what prices Tom's paying for dried goods. If we can establish him as a regular buyer, we might have a sustainable side business here." "You're already thinking past the immediate crisis." "Always. Solving one problem is good. Building systems that prevent future problems is better." She stretched, wincing. "But right now, I'm thinking about sleep and maybe a bath. I'll heat water for you." "Caleb, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. You're my wife, and you just worked through the night to save my ranch. The least I can do is heat bath water." Something soft crossed her face. "Thank you." They walked back to the house in the gray dawn light, exhausted but strangely content. At the base of the stairs, Evelyn paused. "This is working, isn't it? Us." "Better than I expected," Caleb admitted. "Better than I feared," she countered. Then, impulsively, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Good night, husband." "Good morning, wife." She laughed, the first genuine, unguarded laugh he'd heard from her, and climbed the stairs. Caleb watched her go, then went to stoke the fire and heat water, his heart lighter than it had been in months. The next 3 days were a blur of relentless work. They rose before dawn and worked past midnight, their entire world narrowing to apples, cattle, and the desperate mathematics of survival. Caleb taught Evelyn how to judge cattle quality, how to spot the subtle signs of good health and strong breeding. She learned quickly, asking pointed questions and remembering everything. Together, they separated out the steers for sale, choosing the ones that would bring the best prices without compromising the future herd. It was brutal calculus, selling off assets they needed to keep, mortgaging the future to save the present. "This feels wrong," Caleb said as they drove 20 steers into a separate pen. "These are good animals. I should be keeping them." "You are keeping them, just in liquid form." Evelyn made a note in the small ledger she'd started carrying. "Once we're stable, we can rebuild. But we can't rebuild anything if we lose the land entirely." The apples dried beautifully in the barn loft, the slices curling and shrinking as moisture evaporated. Evelyn checked them twice daily, rotating the cloths, discarding any pieces that showed signs of mold. Her standards were exacting, and she rejected anything that didn't meet them. "We're selling quality or we're selling nothing," she insisted. "Our reputation is the only currency we have right now. If people buy dried apples from Rowan Ranch and they're exceptional, they'll come back, they'll tell others. But if we sell inferior product just to make a few extra dollars, we've destroyed any chance of building a real business." On the 4th day, they loaded the wagon with the first batch of dried apples and the best of the fresh fruit and headed into town. Tom Hendricks greeted them with professional interest that shifted to genuine surprise as he examined the merchandise. "These are good," he said, holding up a dried apple slice to the light. "Really good. Clean, uniform, properly dried. Where'd you learn to do this?" "Boston," Evelyn said calmly. "We had access to commercial fruit processing operations. I observed and remembered. I can sell these. Premium price, too. City folk are always asking for quality dried fruit." He calculated quickly. "I'll take everything you've got at 75 cents a pound, and I'll commit to buying your entire output for the season at the same price." Evelyn didn't hesitate. $1 a pound, and you have exclusive rights to sell in Ashford Creek. We won't undercut you by selling direct to customers in town." "That's steep." "That's fair. Your markup will still be healthy, and you'll have a unique product none of your competitors can offer." She met his eyes steadily. "We're not asking for charity, Tom. We're offering you a good business opportunity. Take it or leave it." Tom laughed, shaking his head. "Caleb, your wife drives a hard bargain." "Don't I know it," Caleb said, trying not to smile. "All right, $1 a pound, but I want first right of refusal on any other products you develop. If you start making preserves or cider or anything else, I get to bid before you talk to anyone else." "Agreed." Evelyn shook his hand firmly. "Pleasure doing business with you." They left the mercantile with $43 and a standing order for more dried apples. It was a good start, but they still needed more than $400 in 2.5 weeks. That evening, as they worked in the barn preparing more apples for drying, a rider appeared on the road. Caleb recognized Marcus Jameson's distinctive palomino before he could make out the man himself. "Company," he said quietly. Evelyn looked up, saw the approaching rider, and set down her knife. The land buyer? In the flesh. Good. I've been wanting to meet him. Jameson was a tall man in his 50s, well-dressed even for ranch visits, his boots polished and his hat expensive. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime on horseback and approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Caleb, good to see you, and this must be the bride I've been hearing about. He tipped his hat to Evelyn. Marcus Jameson, ma'am. I own the Triple J spread north of here. Evelyn Rowan, a pleasure. I'll get right to the point. I'm here to make you an offer for your property. Given your current financial situation, I thought you might appreciate a straightforward solution. Our financial situation is none of your concern, Evelyn said pleasantly. Perhaps not. But the territory being what it is, word travels. I know about the bank loan. I know Cartwright's pressing for payment. He pulled a document from his jacket. I'm prepared to offer you $1,200 for the land, buildings, and remaining livestock. That's enough to pay off your debt and give you a fresh start somewhere else. The property's worth 3 times that, Caleb said. In better circumstances, maybe. But you're not selling in better circumstances, are you? You're selling under duress, which substantially affects valuation. Evelyn took the document and read it carefully, her expression neutral. When she finished, she handed it back. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Jameson. We decline. Mrs. Rowan, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. You've made arrangements with Cartwright to foreclose on our property at a favorable price. You're hoping to pressure us into selling directly to you for slightly more than the foreclosure would bring you, thus avoiding any legal complications. It's a sound strategy, but we're not interested. Jameson's smile vanished. You should reconsider. That ranch is going to fail whether you want to admit it or not. Better to sell now with some dignity than wait for the bank to take it. The ranch isn't going to fail, Evelyn said calmly. We have plans in place, revenue streams developing, and 3 weeks to make good on our obligations, which we will do. 3 weeks isn't much time. It's enough. Jameson looked between them, his expression calculating. You're very confident for a woman who knows nothing about ranching. I know about business, Mr. Jameson, and I know that this land has value beyond cattle grazing. Water rights, agricultural potential, strategic location. You want it because you're smart enough to see that value. We're smart enough to see it too, which means we're not selling. For a long moment, Jameson was silent. Then he nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his eyes. Well, I can see Caleb's bride is no pushover. Very well, Mrs. Rowan, I'll withdraw my offer. But if circumstances change, they won't, Evelyn said firmly. After Jameson rode away, Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. You just turned down $1,200. I turned down a fraction of what this place is worth, and I did it because I meant what I told him. We're going to save this ranch, Caleb, no matter what it takes. She returned to slicing apples, her hands steady, her expression determined. Watching her work, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this fierce, brilliant woman who'd walked into his life 4 days ago, was fighting for his future as if it were her own, because it was her own now. They were partners. And somehow, against all odds, they were beginning to win. The following morning brought rain. Caleb woke to the sound of it drumming against the roof, a steady downpour that would turn the roads to mud and make driving cattle nearly impossible. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the water cascade from the eaves, calculating how much this would delay their plans. They'd scheduled the cattle drive to town for today, hoping to catch the stock buyer before he moved on to the next territory. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Caleb, are you awake? He opened the door to find Evelyn already dressed, her hair pinned up, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. She looked tired. They'd both been running on minimal sleep for days, but her eyes were sharp and focused. The rain, he said unnecessarily. I know. We can't move the cattle in this. She stepped into the hallway, keeping a proper distance. But we can use the time differently. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without judgment until I'm finished. Something in her tone made his chest tighten. All right. Not here. Downstairs. I'll make coffee. They sat at the kitchen table as rain sheeted against the windows, 2 cups of coffee between them growing cold as Evelyn talked. She didn't look at him while she spoke, her eyes fixed on her hands, folded tightly in her lap. My father's name was Jonathan Hart. For 23 years, he managed investments for some of the wealthiest families in Boston. He was respected, trusted, considered brilliant with money. He took a small inheritance from his father and turned it into a fortune. People came to him because he had a gift for seeing opportunities others missed. She paused, gathering herself. 8 years ago, he took on a new partner, Richard Blackwell. Old Boston family, impeccable credentials, charming in that way wealthy men often are. My father trusted him completely. They shared clients, shared accounts, made decisions together. For years, everything was fine. The business grew, profits increased. My father was happier than I'd ever seen him. Caleb remained silent, sensing she needed to tell this her own way. What my father didn't know was that Blackwell was embezzling. Small amounts at first, carefully hidden in complex transactions that looked legitimate. Then larger amounts. He was using client funds to cover gambling debts, to maintain a lifestyle far beyond what his salary could support. And he was very, very good at hiding it. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless, as if she were reciting facts about strangers. The scheme collapsed 6 months ago. A routine audit uncovered discrepancies. When the accountants dug deeper, they found years of theft. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, stolen from people who trusted my father with their life savings. By the time anyone realized what was happening, Blackwell had fled to Europe with whatever money he could grab. "And your father?" Caleb asked quietly. "The clients wanted someone to blame. Blackwell was gone, so they blamed my father. Said he must have known, must have been complicit. The newspapers picked up the story. Prominent financial advisor involved in massive fraud. It didn't matter that the investigation cleared him. The damage was done. Evelyn, he had a heart attack 3 weeks after the scandal broke. The doctor said it was probably building for years, that the stress just triggered what was inevitable. But I know better. The shame killed him. The knowledge that people he'd worked with for decades thought he was a thief. That killed him." She finally looked up, and her eyes were dry but haunted. "I stayed for the funeral. I tried to salvage what I could of the business, but every door I knocked on closed in my face. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me. The society that had welcomed my father for decades suddenly couldn't remember his name. So I liquidated what little remained, paid off his debts, and used the last of my inheritance to buy a train ticket west. To become a mail-order bride. To disappear. To start over somewhere no one knew the name Hart or cared about Boston scandals." She wrapped her hands around her cold coffee cup. "I lied in my letters to you, Caleb. Not about my education or my skills, but about my reasons for coming. I said I wanted adventure, a fresh start. The truth is, I was running. I'm still running." The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. Caleb studied his wife across the table, this woman who'd spent the past week fighting to save his ranch with every ounce of her considerable intelligence and will. A woman who'd faced down a banker and a land baron without flinching. A woman who was apparently terrified he'd reject her for crimes she'd never committed. "Are you finished?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Because I have some things to say, and I need you to listen without interrupting." He reached across the table and took her hands in his. "First, I don't give a damn about what happened in Boston. Your father was innocent, you were innocent, and anyone who blamed you for another man's crimes is a fool. Second, you didn't lie to me. You came here wanting a fresh start. That's exactly what you told me, and it's exactly what I offered. The specifics of why you needed that start are your business. But if people here find out, let me finish. Third, and this is important, so listen carefully. You are the smartest, most capable person I've ever met. In 1 week, you've accomplished more to save this ranch than I managed in 18 months. You've negotiated with bankers, rejected land buyers, created new revenue streams, and somehow convinced Tom Hendricks to pay premium prices for dried apples. You've worked 18-hour days without complaint. You've asked for nothing except the chance to help." His grip on her hands tightened. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop apologizing for your past. You're going to stop expecting me to reject you, and you're going to trust that when I made vows to you 4 days ago, I meant every word. For better or worse, Evelyn, this is the worst part of your story, and I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. She stared at him, tears finally spilling over. Why? Because you're my wife. Because you're my partner. Because in 4 days you've given me more hope than I've had in a year. He smiled slightly. And because I'm beginning to suspect that falling in love with you is going to be the easiest thing I've ever done. The words hung in the air between them, surprising them both. Evelyn's breath caught, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she was around the table and in his arms, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. I'm scared, she whispered against his shoulder. So am I. But we're scared together now. That has to count for something. They stood there while the rain fell, two people who'd started as strangers learning to trust each other with truths that hurt to speak. When Evelyn finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer than Caleb had yet seen them. I'm still going to drive you crazy with spreadsheets, she said, her voice rough. I'm counting on it. She laughed, shaky but genuine, and wiped her eyes. The rain's not stopping. We should check on the apples in the barn, make sure the roof isn't leaking onto them. In a minute. First, finish your coffee. And tell me about your father, not the scandal, him. What was he like? So she did. She told him about Jonathan Hart's terrible jokes and his love of chess, about how he'd taught her to read financial papers when she was 8 years old because she'd asked and he'd never believed in limiting learning by age or gender. She told him about their Sunday tradition of walking through the Boston Common, talking about everything and nothing, about how he'd cried at her mother's funeral but never let his grief stop him from being present for his daughter. By the time she finished, the coffee was long cold, but something had shifted between them. A wall had come down. The partnership they'd built on necessity and mutual respect had deepened into something more personal, more real. He would have liked you, Evelyn said softly. He always said the measure of a person was how they responded to adversity. You've lost your father, faced losing everything he built, and you're still fighting, still trying to do right by his legacy. He would have respected that. I wish I could have met him. So do I. She stood, straightening her dress. Now, let's go check those apples. We may not be able to move cattle today, but we can keep working on our other revenue stream. The rain continued for 2 more days, trapping them on the ranch and forcing them to adapt their plans. They couldn't drive the cattle to town, couldn't cut the second hay crop, couldn't do any of the outdoor work they'd scheduled. Instead, they focused on what they could control. Evelyn took over the kitchen table, spreading out every piece of paper related to the ranch's finances. She created a new ledger system, organized receipts by category, built a complete picture of income and expenses going back 3 years. The work was painstaking and tedious, but she approached it with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. Your father was paying too much for feed, she announced on the second day of rain. Look at this. He was buying from Hendricks at premium prices when the Miller farm 3 miles east sells the same quality for 20% less. Pa liked to support local business, Caleb said from where he was mending tack by the fire. Supporting local business is admirable. Overpaying to the point of threatening your own survival is foolish. She made a note. Next time we need feed, we buy from Miller. The savings over a year would be substantial. Miller's place is harder to get to. The road's rough. Then we make the trip less frequently and buy in larger quantities. Caleb, I know this feels like criticizing your father, but it's not. It's learning from his mistakes so we can do better. She was right, of course. She usually was. But it still stung, seeing his father's choices picked apart and found wanting. As if sensing his discomfort, Evelyn set down her pen and came to sit beside him. My father made mistakes too. He trusted the wrong person, didn't verify what he should have verified. But his mistakes don't erase all the good he did, all the people he helped, all the years he worked with integrity. The same is true for your father. He built something real here, Caleb. We're just making it stronger. I know, it's just hard sometimes, seeing how much he struggled. He struggled because he was doing it alone. You're not alone anymore. The simple truth of it settled over him like a warm blanket. He reached for her hand and she gave it, and they sat together watching the rain blur the windows while the fire crackled and the ranch waited for better weather. On the 3rd morning, the rain finally stopped. They woke to clear skies and the prospect of muddy but passable roads. Caleb was in the barn checking on the horses when Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face pale. The stock buyer, she said. Tom Hendricks just rode out to tell us. He left yesterday. He's not coming back until spring. The bottom dropped out of Caleb's stomach. No, we need to sell those cattle now. We can't wait until spring. I know. She was already thinking, her mind racing through alternatives. We'll have to take them to the railhead ourselves. It's a 3-day drive to North Platte, but the stockyards there run auctions twice weekly. If we leave tomorrow, we can make the Friday auction. That's a hard drive, especially with just the two of us managing 20 head. Then we'd better get started. She turned to go, then paused. Caleb, we can do this. I know we can. Her confidence should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified him. A 3-day cattle drive across open prairie with roads still muddy from rain, just the two of them managing animals that could scatter or stampede at the slightest provocation. If anything went wrong, if they lost cattle, if Evelyn got hurt, if they missed the auction, they'd have no chance of making the loan payment. But what choice did they have? We leave at first light, he said. They spent the day preparing. Caleb checked every piece of tack, mended what needed mending, packed supplies for 3 days on the trail. Evelyn prepared food that would travel well and organized their documents, including the written agreement from Cartwright showing exactly how much time they had left. 14 days, she said, studying the paper. We make the Friday auction. That gives us 11 days to get back and settle accounts with the bank. Assuming we get the prices we need. We will. Those are good cattle, well-fed and healthy. The stockyard buyers know quality. That evening, they ate an early dinner and tried to rest, knowing they'd need their strength for the days ahead. But Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, thinking about everything that could go wrong, until he heard soft footsteps in the hall. He opened his door to find Evelyn standing there in her nightgown and wrapper, her hair loose around her shoulders. I can't sleep either, she said quietly. Worrying about the drive? Worrying about everything. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? Sending for a mail-order bride? If you'd known what you were getting, all my complications, all this chaos, would you still have written that letter? Caleb studied her in the dim hallway, this brilliant, damaged woman who'd turned his life upside down in the best possible way. A week ago, I was alone and drowning. Now I have a partner who's smarter than I am, tougher than I expected, and brave enough to drive cattle across the prairie, despite having never done it before. So no, I don't regret it. Do you? Regret coming here? No. I regret that I didn't come as honestly as I should have. I regret that I let fear make me hide parts of myself. She looked down at her hands. I regret that we're building something real, and I'm terrified it's going to collapse because of my past. Evelyn, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. Your past made you who you are. It taught you to fight, to think strategically, to see possibilities others miss. Without your past, you wouldn't be the woman standing here. And that woman is exactly who I need. Who you need or who you want? The question hung between them, weighted with vulnerability. Caleb knew his answer mattered, knew she was asking for more than reassurance. Both, he said simply. I need your help saving this ranch, and I want you here, with me, building whatever this becomes. Not because I'm desperate, but because I'm starting to care about you. More than I expected. More than is probably wise after 1 week. Evelyn's breath caught. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for declarations or promises. I just wanted you to know, before we risk everything on this drive, that you matter to me. Whatever happens, that's true. She stepped forward and kissed him. Not the chaste kiss of their wedding, but something deeper, more urgent. Her hands came up to frame his face, and he pulled her closer, feeling the heat of her through the thin fabric of her nightgown. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I'm terrified of this, she whispered. Of the cattle drive? Of caring about you. Of letting myself hope that this could be real. It is real, Evelyn. Complicated and messy and probably doomed to drive us both crazy, but real. She laughed softly, then pulled back. I should let you sleep. We have a long day tomorrow. Stay. The word came out before he could think better of it. Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone tonight. For a moment she hesitated, propriety warring with desire for comfort. Then she nodded and took his hand, letting him lead her into his room. They lay down together on top of the covers, fully clothed, and she curled against his side with her head on his shoulder. "Tell me about your mother," she said quietly. So he did, describing Sarah Rowan's gentle strength and practical wisdom, her garden that had fed the family through hard winters, her insistence on education even when money was tight. He talked until Evelyn's breathing evened out and he knew she'd fallen asleep. Then he lay awake a while longer, his arms around his wife, and tried not to think about all the ways this could fall apart. Dawn came too quickly. They rose in the pre-dawn darkness, dressed in their sturdiest clothes, and ate a quick breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee. By the time the sun crested the horizon, they had the cattle gathered and were ready to move. "You'll ride on the right flank," Caleb instructed, handing Evelyn the reins to one of the gentler horses. "I'll take the left and push from behind. The cattle know the routine, so mostly you're just keeping them together and moving forward. If one tries to break away, get in front of it and turn it back to the group. And if they all try to run, then you get out of the way and let them go. Don't be a hero, Evelyn. Cattle can be replaced. You can't." She nodded, her face set with determination, and swung into the saddle with surprising grace. They moved out as the sun painted the prairie gold, 20 steers plodding ahead of them, heading east toward North Platte, and their only chance at salvation. The first day was exhausting, but uneventful. The cattle moved steadily, following the main road toward the railhead. They stopped at midday to let the animals graze and drink from a creek, then pushed on through the afternoon. By evening, Caleb estimated they'd covered nearly 12 miles. They made camp in a small depression that offered shelter from the wind, hobbling the horses and letting the cattle rest. Evelyn proved surprisingly competent at camp tasks, building a fire and heating beans while Caleb checked the animals. "You're a natural," he said, accepting a plate of food. "I'm terrified and faking competence," she corrected. "But thank you for the encouragement." They ate in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the prairie. When full dark fell, Caleb banked the fire and they rolled out their blankets near enough for warmth, but maintaining propriety. "Caleb?" Evelyn's voice came soft through the darkness. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I know how much is riding on getting these cattle to market. We're partners. That means we trust each other with everything. Even the parts that scare us? Especially those." He heard her shift in her blankets, moving closer. "I'm glad I married you. Even though I come with a failing ranch and crushing debt, even though, maybe because, I needed something to fight for, you gave me that." Sleep came easier that night, despite the hard ground and the chill air. Something had settled between them, a deeper understanding that went beyond words. The second day started well. They were back on the trail by dawn, the cattle refreshed and moving easily. But by midday, the weather began to change. Dark clouds built on the western horizon, and the wind picked up, carrying the metallic scent of approaching rain. "Storm coming," Caleb said, watching the sky. "A bad one." "How far to the next town?" 8 miles, maybe 10. We won't make it before the storm hits." "Then we find shelter and wait it out?" But even as she said it, the first drops began to fall, fat and cold. Within minutes, it had escalated to a downpour. The cattle began to shift nervously, unsettled by the thunder that rolled across the prairie. "Keep them moving," Caleb shouted over the wind. "If they scatter in this, we'll never find them all." They pushed forward through rain that fell so hard it was difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark flashes. The cattle were spooked now, beginning to run, and all Caleb and Evelyn could do was try to keep them pointed in the right direction. A massive bolt of lightning struck nearby, the thunder simultaneous and deafening. The cattle panicked completely, breaking into a full stampede. Caleb saw Evelyn's horse rear, saw her grab for the saddle horn, saw her maintaining her seat through sheer determination. "Evelyn, let them go! Just stay safe!" But she was already racing alongside the stampeding cattle, somehow keeping them from scattering completely, herding them through the storm with skill that should have taken years to develop. Caleb rode to join her, and together they managed to keep the herd somewhat together as the storm raged around them. The rain finally slackened after an hour that felt like 10. The cattle slowed, exhausted, and Caleb counted heads with his heart in his throat. 18. They'd lost 2. He found Evelyn dismounting on shaking legs, her clothes soaked through, her face pale but set. She was shivering violently. "We need to find shelter," he said. "Get you dry before you catch pneumonia." "The cattle will keep for an hour. You won't. Come on." They found an abandoned homestead a mile off the road, just a crude soddy with half a roof, but it was dry. Caleb got a fire going while Evelyn stripped off her soaked outer layers, wrapping herself in the one dry blanket they'd managed to protect. "That was incredible," Caleb said, kneeling beside the fire. "What you did out there. You kept those cattle together when most experienced drovers would have lost them all." I was terrified." "You were brilliant." He looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who kept surprising him. "Where did you learn to ride like that?" "I didn't. I just held on and refused to fall." She laughed shakily. "Is this what ranching is always like?" "Pretty much. Moments of peace interrupted by moments of terror." "Then I'm definitely in the right business." She moved closer to the fire, still shivering. "We lost 2 cattle. Better than losing 20 or losing you." "We needed every dollar from those sales, Caleb." "We'll make it work. We always do." He pulled her against his side, sharing warmth. "Rest now. We'll look for the missing cattle when it's light." They found one of the lost steers the next morning, grazing peacefully in a gully. The other was gone, probably run off too far to track. With 19 head remaining, they pushed on toward North Platte, reaching the stockyards late Friday morning. The auction was already underway when they arrived, the air thick with the smell of cattle and the sound of auctioneers calling bids. Caleb registered their cattle while Evelyn watched the proceedings, studying prices and buyer behavior with the same intensity she brought to everything. "The prices are lower than you estimated," she said quietly when he returned. "They're averaging about $13 a head." Caleb's stomach dropped. $13 times 19 cattle was $247. Not nearly enough. "We need 15 at minimum," he said. "Preferably 18 or 20. "Then we don't take the first bid." Evelyn was already thinking, planning. "We wait for the right buyer, someone looking for quality breeding stock, not just meat cattle." "Evelyn, we can't afford to be choosy." "Yes, we can. Trust me." Their cattle went up for auction just after noon. The auctioneer opened bidding at $10, and several hands went up immediately. Evelyn watched intently, her eyes tracking which buyers were bidding, how aggressively they competed. "There," she whispered, pointing to a man in a fine coat standing near the rail. "He's been buying selectively all morning, only the best animals, and he pays premium prices." The bidding climbed slowly to $13. The auctioneer looked ready to close the sale when Evelyn stood up. "Excuse me." Her voice cut through the noise. "These aren't meat cattle. They're breeding stock from verified bloodlines. The buyer might want to inspect them more closely before settling on meat prices." Every eye in the stockyard turned to her. The auctioneer looked annoyed, but the well-dressed man stepped forward with interest. "Bloodlines, you say?" "My husband's father maintained detailed breeding records. These steers come from stock bred for hardiness, disease resistance, and strong weight gain, worth considerably more than $13 as breeding animals." It was a gamble. The man could call their bluff, demand to see records they didn't have. But instead he climbed into the pen and examined the nearest steer with expert eyes. He checked teeth, felt muscle tone, studied conformation. $15, he said finally. "For the lot." 18, Evelyn countered calmly. "And that's fair for what you're getting." The man smiled. 17, final offer. Evelyn glanced at Caleb and he gave a tiny nod. "Done," she said. They walked away from the stockyards with $323, more than enough to make the bank payment with money left over for supplies. Caleb felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. "How did you know?" he asked as they loaded their empty wagon. "How did you know he'd pay more?" "I didn't, for certain, but I watched him all morning. He's building a herd, not buying meat. And people building something are always willing to pay for quality." She climbed onto the wagon seat, exhaustion finally showing in her face. "Now let's go home. We have a bank to visit and a future to secure. The ride back to Ashford Creek took 2.5 days, and they arrived home with 5 days left before the loan deadline. They'd been gone a week, and the ranch looked somehow both exactly the same and completely different. The dried apples in the barn had finished curing. The hayfield was ready for its second cutting. Everything waited for them, patient and possible. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table and counted out the money one more time. The cattle sale had brought $323. The apple sales added $43. The hay, once cut and sold, would bring another $100. It was enough. Barely, but enough. "We did it," Evelyn said softly. "We actually did it. You did it. None of this would have worked without you." She shook her head. "We did it together. You knew the ranching. I knew the business. Neither of us could have managed alone." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "I love you." The words came out simply, without fanfare, as natural as breathing. Evelyn's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked terrified. Then her expression softened into something that might have been wonder. "You can't possibly know that. It's been less than 2 weeks. I know what I feel. I know that you're the bravest person I've ever met. I know that when I imagine the future now, you're in every part of it. I know that somewhere between the stagecoach arriving and now, you stopped being a stranger and became the person I want beside me for whatever comes next." He squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." Evelyn stood and came around the table, settling onto his lap with her arms around his neck. "I don't know if what I feel is love yet, but I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before. I know that fighting to save this ranch has felt like fighting to save myself, and I know that the thought of losing you terrifies me more than anything else." She kissed him softly. "So maybe it is love, or maybe it's becoming love. Either way, I'm here, I'm staying, and I want to build this future with you." They sat there in the kitchen as the sun set, holding each other. Two people who'd started as desperate strangers and somehow found in each other exactly what they needed. Outside, the ranch waited for them, battered but not broken, struggling but not defeated. Like them. Tomorrow they would go to the bank. Tomorrow they would make the payment and buy themselves time to keep building. Tomorrow they would start planning for the future they'd fought so hard to secure. But tonight, they simply held each other and let themselves feel the impossible relief of having survived. Together. Morning came with a crispness that promised autumn was settling in for good. Caleb woke to find Evelyn already up, dressed in her best traveling suit, the same blue wool she'd worn when she first arrived, now cleaned and pressed. She stood at the mirror, pinning up her hair with methodical precision, and he recognized the ritual for what it was: armor. She was preparing for battle. "We don't have to do this today," he said from the doorway. "We have 5 days left. And every one of those days is another day for Cartwright to find a loophole or for Jameson to make trouble." She met his eyes in the mirror. "We end this today. We walk in there with the full payment, settle the account, and remove any leverage they have over us. You're sure the numbers are right? We've counted 3 times, but $453.70. Enough for the payment with a small cushion." She turned to face him. "Caleb, I've checked the arithmetic a dozen times. We're ready." He nodded, trying to match her confidence. The money sat in a leather pouch on the kitchen table downstairs, more cash than he'd seen in one place since his father died. It represented everything they'd accomplished in 2 desperate weeks: the apples, the cattle, the hay they'd cut and sold yesterday to a grateful neighbor. It was enough to save the ranch. It had to be enough. They rode to town in the wagon, neither speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts. The morning was beautiful, the prairie grasses gold in the slanting sunlight, but Caleb barely noticed. His entire focus was on the pouch tucked safely in his jacket, on the numbers Evelyn had calculated, on the confrontation waiting for them at the bank. Ashford Creek was quiet when they arrived, most folks still at home finishing breakfast or tending to morning chores. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the bank and helped Evelyn down, noting how her hand trembled slightly in his before she steadied herself. "Together," she said quietly. "Together," he agreed. The bank's interior was dim after the bright morning, and it took a moment for Caleb's eyes to adjust. The young clerk looked up from his desk, recognition crossing his face, along with something that might have been surprise or concern. Before he could speak, Edward Cartwright emerged from his office, and Caleb's stomach dropped at the banker's expression. He looked smug, satisfied, like a man holding winning cards. "Mr. and Mrs. Rowan, this is unexpected. I wasn't anticipating seeing you until the deadline." "We're here to settle our account," Evelyn said crisply. "The full payment as agreed in our written extension." "Ah, yes, the extension." Cartwright's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid we have a situation that complicates matters." Caleb felt ice slide down his spine. "What situation?" "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. Privately." "Here is fine," Evelyn said, her voice like steel. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of your clerk. Transparency is important in financial dealings. Don't you think?" Cartwright's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Very well. It's come to my attention that there's been an error in the loan documentation. The original note signed by your father included a clause requiring annual property inspections to verify the value of the collateral." "And?" Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. "And those inspections were never conducted, which means the loan has been in technical default since your father's death. That default supersedes our recent extension agreement." The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn's hand found Caleb's arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "That's convenient," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This supposed clause you've suddenly discovered. I don't recall seeing it mentioned in any of the loan documents we reviewed. Nevertheless, it exists. I have the original note here." Cartwright produced a folder from his desk, laying it open to reveal yellowed papers covered in his father's familiar handwriting. Page 3, paragraph 2, clear as day. Caleb stared at the document, his father's signature at the bottom making his chest ache. He'd never seen the original loan papers. His father had kept them in the bank's safe, and after his death, Caleb had simply continued making payments based on the payment schedule Cartwright provided. Evelyn stepped forward, her hand extended. "May I?" Cartwright hesitated, then handed over the papers. Evelyn read quickly, her eyes scanning the dense text with practiced efficiency. Caleb watched her face, trying to read her expression, seeing calculation, and then something that looked like triumph. "This clause," she said slowly, "requires annual inspections beginning in the 3rd year of the loan term. The loan was originated 5 years ago, which means the first inspection should have been conducted 2 years ago. During your tenure as bank president, Mr. Cartwright, why were they never performed? That's not relevant to—" "It's absolutely relevant. If the bank failed to conduct required inspections, that's the bank's error, not the borrower's. You can't claim default based on your own negligence." She flipped to another page. "Furthermore, this clause states that the bank must provide written notice 30 days in advance of any inspection. I see no such notices in the loan file." "Those would have been sent to Mr. Rowan Sr., who kept meticulous records, all of which are now in our possession. There are no inspection notices, Mr. Cartwright, because you never sent any." Evelyn's voice was calm but relentless. "What you're attempting is fraud. You're manufacturing a default that doesn't exist in order to foreclose on property you've already promised to Marcus Jameson." The color drained from Cartwright's face. "That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime, one I'm prepared to take to the territorial court if necessary." She set the papers down on the clerk's desk deliberately, where the young man could see them clearly. "Now, we're here to make our payment as agreed in our written extension. You're going to accept it, mark our account as current, and provide us with a receipt and updated loan balance. Or we're going to the sheriff, and then to the newspaper, and then to every depositor in this bank to explain how their money is being used to facilitate land theft." The silence that followed was absolute. The clerk stared at the papers, clearly reading the relevant passages. Cartwright's face had gone from pale to red, anger and calculation warring in his expression. "The payment alone won't bring the account fully current," he said finally, his voice tight. "There are penalties for the missed inspection. There are no penalties for an inspection the bank never attempted to conduct. Stop while you're only guilty of incompetence, Mr. Cartwright. Keep pushing and you'll be guilty of fraud." Evelyn pulled the money pouch from Caleb's jacket and counted out the bills with steady hands. $450, the exact amount specified in our extension agreement. "Take it, or explain to a judge why you refused legal tender for a legitimate debt. Cartwright stared at the money, at Evelyn's unwavering gaze, at his clerk who was clearly listening to every word. Whatever game he'd been playing, he'd lost, and they all knew it. Very well. He snatched up the bills, counting them with sharp, angry movements. The payment is accepted. Your account is current. He scribbled a receipt with vicious strokes. But understand this, Mrs. Rowan. The next payment is due in 30 days. If you're even 1 day late, we won't be. Evelyn took the receipt, examined it carefully, then tucked it safely in her reticule. Thank you for your time, Mr. Cartwright. We'll see ourselves out. They walked out of the bank into morning sunshine that felt like absolution. Caleb didn't speak until they were in the wagon, until they'd turned onto the road leading out of town. Then he pulled the horses to a stop and turned to look at his wife. What you did in there was necessary, but her hands were shaking now, adrenaline catching up with her. He was trying to steal the ranch, Caleb, using legal manipulation to force a foreclosure that would benefit himself and Jameson. I couldn't let that happen. How did you know? About the inspection clause, the penalties, all of it? I didn't, not for certain, but I know how corrupt bankers operate. I watched Blackwell use similar tactics against my father's clients. Her voice was bitter. Legal language twisted to create defaults that didn't exist, penalties invented out of thin air. The goal is always to confuse and intimidate until people give up their rights without fighting. You weren't confused. No, I was furious. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That bank holds my father's legacy and my husband's future. I wasn't going to let Cartwright destroy both. Caleb pulled her close, feeling her trembling against him. You saved us. Again. We saved us. You made the payments all these months when you could have walked away. You kept the ranch running when it would have been easier to quit. All I did was see through Cartwright's bluff. All you did, he repeated, almost laughing. Evelyn, you just outmaneuvered a banker and a land baron using nothing but intelligence and nerve. That's not nothing. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. Well, when you put it that way, I suppose I did all right. Better than all right. He kissed her forehead. Now let's go home. We have a ranch to run. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. They rose at dawn and worked until dark, but now the work had purpose beyond mere survival. They were building something, and they could feel it taking shape around them. Caleb cut and sold the second hay harvest, bringing in the $100 Evelyn had predicted. She used the money to pay down additional principal on the loan, reducing their debt faster than the minimum payments required. When he questioned the strategy, she showed him the numbers. Every dollar paid against principal saved them $3 in interest over the loan's lifetime. We're not just surviving anymore, she explained, her finger tracing columns in the ledger. We're building equity, establishing credit, creating a foundation for expansion. Every smart financial decision now pays dividends for years. The apple orchard became a project they tackled together. Evelyn read everything she could find about fruit cultivation, while Caleb applied his practical knowledge of the land. They pruned the neglected trees, cleared dead wood, amended the soil with composted manure. It was hard work with no immediate payoff, but Evelyn insisted it was an investment in future income. Next year, these trees will produce triple what they gave us this fall, she predicted, standing back to survey their work. In 3 years, we'll have enough fruit to justify a small processing operation, maybe even cider. You're thinking pretty far ahead. Someone has to. You're too focused on today's tasks to plan for tomorrow's opportunities. But she smiled when she said it, softening the criticism. They fell into a partnership that worked precisely because they were different. Caleb knew the land, the animals, the practical realities of ranch work. Evelyn knew business, markets, strategic planning. Where he saw obstacles, she saw opportunities. Where she got lost in abstract planning, he grounded her in what was actually possible. The town began to notice the changes. Tom Hendricks remarked on the quality of their dried apples, ordering more than he'd initially committed to. The neighbor who'd bought their hay asked if they'd be willing to sell seed next spring. Evelyn's careful selection of hay grasses had resulted in superior quality that everyone recognized. Even Reverend Matthews stopped Caleb after church one Sunday to comment on how well the ranch seemed to be recovering. Your bride is good for you, the Reverend said with a knowing smile. "You look happier than I've seen you in years." He was right. Caleb was happy, in a way he hadn't fully allowed himself to acknowledge. The ranch was stabilizing, yes, but that wasn't what made him whistle while he worked or look forward to evenings by the fire. It was Evelyn. The way she studied ledgers with such intensity, the way she laughed when he teased her about her city manners, the way she fit against him when they sat together planning the next day's work. They hadn't consummated their marriage, both of them dancing around that intimacy with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. But they were growing closer in other ways. She'd stopped sleeping in the guest room after the cattle drive, instead joining him in the larger bedroom where they'd lie awake talking until exhaustion claimed them. They held hands unconsciously now, touched casually throughout the day, had developed a physical ease with each other that felt natural and right. 6 weeks after their showdown at the bank, a letter arrived from Boston. Evelyn went pale when she saw the return address, her hands shaking as she opened it. Caleb watched her read, saw her face cycle through shock, disbelief, and finally something that might have been vindication. When she finished, she simply stood there holding the letter, tears streaming silently down her face. "Evelyn? What is it?" She handed him the letter without speaking. It was from a lawyer named Harrison, someone who'd worked with her father. The message was brief but explosive. Richard Blackwell had been apprehended in Paris. Facing extradition and certain prison time, he'd confessed to everything, providing documentation that completely exonerated Jonathan Hart. The Boston papers were running retractions. The clients were being made whole from recovered funds. The Hart name was being restored. "You were right," Caleb said quietly. "Your father was innocent. Everyone knows it now. He's still dead." Her voice broke. "He died thinking people believed he was a thief. He never knew he'd be vindicated. But you know, and now you can stop running." She looked up at him, her face wet with tears. "I'm not running anymore. This is my home now. You're my home." He pulled her close and let her cry, understanding that these tears were for her father, for the vindication that came too late, for the loss that could never be recovered. When she finally quieted, she stayed in his arms, and he could feel her breathing gradually slow and steady. "I should write back to Mr. Harrison," she said eventually. "There are probably legal matters to settle, documents to sign. Tomorrow, tonight, just let yourself feel this." She nodded against his chest, and they stood there in the kitchen while the sun set and the ranch settled into evening quiet around them. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Caleb was in the barn when he heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving at a steady pace. He emerged to find Marcus Jameson and 2 of his ranch hands riding up the main path. "Jameson." Caleb kept his voice neutral, his body positioned between the land baron and the house where Evelyn was working. "Rowan, I'm here to make you another offer. We're not interested in selling. Hear me out first." Jameson dismounted, his movements casual but his eyes sharp. "I've been watching what you and your wife have accomplished. The apple operation, the hay quality, the way you're diversifying income streams. It's smart, really smart." "Thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I don't want to buy you out, Rowan. I want to partner with you." That stopped Caleb cold. "What?" "A partnership. You and your wife clearly have business sense that's rare out here. I have capital and market connections. Together, we could build something significant." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I'm proposing a joint venture. You maintain ownership of your land and operations. I provide investment capital for expansion and access to my distribution networks. We split profits according to contribution and effort." "Why would you propose this? You've been trying to take my land for months." "Because I'm a businessman and I recognize value when I see it. Your wife embarrassed Cartwright and outmaneuvered me. That takes talent. I'd rather have you working with me than against me." Jameson smiled slightly. "And frankly, I'm tired of fighting over scraps when we could be building an empire." Caleb stared at the offered paper, his mind racing. It could be a trap, some new scheme to gain control of the ranch. Or it could be legitimate, a genuine opportunity to accelerate their growth with Jameson's resources. "I need to discuss this with my wife." "Of course, take your time. The offer stands for 30 days. Jameson tipped his hat. "Give my regards to Mrs. Rowan." Tell her I said she plays a better hand than any man I've met." After Jameson left, Caleb found Evelyn in the kitchen kneading bread dough. He explained the visit, the proposal, his own uncertainty. She listened carefully, her hands never stopping their rhythmic work. "What's your instinct?" she asked when he finished. "That it's too good to be true." "Probably, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad." She shaped the dough into a loaf, set it to rise. "Let me read the proposal carefully. I'll need to research Jameson's other business dealings, talk to people who've worked with him, understand his actual financial position. If it's legitimate, it could accelerate our growth by years. If it's a trap, I'll find the teeth." "You're not worried?" "About partnering with a man who tried to steal our land?" "Terrified, but also intrigued." She washed flour from her hands, dried them carefully. "The reality is that we need capital for the improvements we want to make. We can save and grow slowly, or we can leverage outside investment and grow faster. Both strategies have merit. I need more information to know which is right for us." Over the following week, Evelyn conducted what she called due diligence. She talked to neighboring ranchers about their experiences with Jameson, visited the land office to review his property holdings, even wrote to a banker in Omaha who handled his accounts. The picture that emerged was complex. Jameson was ruthless in business, but generally honest in his dealings. He drove hard bargains, but honored his commitments. "He's not a friend," Evelyn concluded, "but he could be a useful ally. The proposal is actually quite fair. He's offering capital investment at reasonable interest rates with profit sharing that reflects our contribution of land and labor. There are provisions protecting our ownership rights, clear termination clauses, dispute resolution mechanisms." "You sound like you want to do this." "I sound like I'm trying to be objective. My instinct says it's risky. My analysis says it could work." She looked at him seriously. "But this is your decision too, Caleb. It's your father's land, your legacy. I'll support whatever you choose." Caleb spent 2 sleepless nights wrestling with the decision. In the end, it came down to trust. Not trust in Jameson, but trust in Evelyn. She'd proven herself over and over, her judgment sound, her instincts sharp. If she thought the risk was manageable, he believed her. They signed the partnership agreement on a cold morning in late October. Jameson arrived with his lawyer and all the necessary documents. Evelyn had added several clauses of her own, protections that Jameson agreed to without argument. "To new beginnings," Jameson said when the papers were signed, shaking first Caleb's hand and then Evelyn's. "I think we're going to do well together." "We'll do well as long as everyone honors their commitments," Evelyn replied coolly. "I'll be watching the books very carefully, Mr. Jameson." "I'd expect nothing less, Mrs. Rowan." The capital injection transformed their operation almost immediately. With Jameson's investment, they hired 2 experienced ranch hands, purchased 20 head of breeding cattle to rebuild the herd, and began construction on a proper apple processing shed. Evelyn developed detailed plans for expansion, creating timelines and budgets that accounted for every dollar. "We'll focus on 3 income streams initially," she explained, showing Caleb the charts she'd created. "Cattle remain our foundation. That's reliable, proven revenue. Apples and apple products become our growth engine, higher margins, increasing market demand. And we'll develop hay production as our stabilizer, consistent income that requires less day-to-day management." Watching her work, seeing the ranch transform under her strategic vision, Caleb was struck by how far they'd come. 2 months ago, he'd been alone and drowning. Now he had a partner, a plan, and a future that looked genuinely promising. The first snow came in early November, dusting the prairie white and forcing them indoors for a day of rest. They spent it by the fire, Evelyn working on accounts while Caleb repaired tack, both of them simply enjoying being together. "I got another letter from Boston," Evelyn said eventually. "Mr. Harrison says there's a settlement from the recovered funds. My father's share of the business, properly distributed. It's not a fortune, but it's substantial." "How much?" $8,000. Caleb nearly dropped the bridle he was mending. "That's... Evelyn, that's enough to pay off the entire ranch loan and still have money left over." "I know." She set down her pen. "I've been thinking about it. We could pay off the loan, free ourselves from Cartwright entirely. Or we could keep some debt, use the settlement money for expansion instead, build the operation faster, take advantage of the momentum we have." "What do you want to do?" I want to pay off that loan. I want to own this land free and clear, no banker having any claim on our home." Her voice was fierce. "My father lost everything because he was too trusting, too willing to let others have power over his business. I won't make that mistake. This ranch will be ours, Caleb, completely ours." "Then that's what we'll do." They paid off the loan 3 weeks later, walking into Cartwright's bank with a cashier's check that represented their total freedom. The banker's face when he saw the amount was worth every moment of struggle it had taken to get there. "This settles the account in full," Evelyn said, her voice pleasant but firm. "We'll need a discharge of lien and all original loan documents marked paid." Cartwright processed the payment with barely concealed anger, clearly furious at losing his leverage over them. When he slid the discharge documents across the desk, Evelyn examined them with meticulous care before accepting them. "A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Cartwright," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We won't be needing your services again." They celebrated that night with a dinner Evelyn had been planning for days. Roasted chicken, apple pie made from their own fruit, wine Tom Hendricks had ordered special from Omaha. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the accomplishment it represented. "To freedom," Caleb toasted, raising his glass. "To partnership," Evelyn countered, touching her glass to his. "To us." "To us," she agreed softly. Later, as they cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in the comfortable synchronization they'd developed, Caleb felt a contentment he'd never experienced before. This was what happiness felt like, he realized. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of someone to face them with. Not security in having everything, but confidence in being able to handle whatever came. "Evelyn?" She looked up from drying dishes, her hair coming loose from its pins, her face soft in the lamplight. "I know we've been taking things slowly, giving ourselves time to figure out what this is." He set down the plate he'd been washing and turned to face her fully. "But I need you to know that I'm not confused anymore. I love you. Not because you saved the ranch, though you did. Not because you're brilliant with business, though you are. I love you because you're brave and fierce, and you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has." Evelyn set down the dish towel, her eyes bright with emotion. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. I'm not waiting anymore, not holding back. I'm all in, completely. Whatever you're ready for, whenever you're ready, I'm here." She closed the distance between them, her hands coming up to frame his face. "I love you too. I think I started falling that first night when you heated bathwater for me after working all day. When you listened to my plans without dismissing them. When you looked at me and saw a partner instead of just a convenient solution to your problems. You're so much more than convenient. I'm difficult and opinionated, and I'll probably drive you crazy. I'm counting on it." He kissed her then, deeply, and felt her respond with an urgency that matched his own. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he saw his own desire reflected in her eyes. "Caleb Rowan," she said, her voice husky, "take me to bed, our bed, and make me your wife in every sense of the word." He didn't need to be asked twice. He lifted her easily, making her laugh, and carried her up the stairs to the bedroom they'd been sharing chastely for weeks. But there was nothing chaste about what followed, only passion and tenderness and the profound relief of finally, completely giving themselves to each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "Only that we waited so long." She pressed a kiss to his heart. "This is real now, isn't it? Not just a partnership or an arrangement, a real marriage." "It was always real, Evelyn, from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. I just didn't know it yet." She shifted to look at him, her eyes serious. "I came here running from my past, but somewhere along the way I stopped running and started building. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to stay and fight and hope." "We gave each other that," he corrected. "I was drowning before you came. You saved me." "We saved each other." She settled back against him. "And now we save the future. Together." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who'd found in desperation what they'd never found in comfort. A partnership that worked, a love that lasted, a future worth fighting for. Outside, the first real snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the ranch in white. But inside, in the warmth they'd created together, Caleb and Evelyn dreamed of spring. Winter settled over the Nebraska prairie like a benediction, transforming the landscape into something stark and beautiful. The snow that had begun falling the night Caleb and Evelyn finally became husband and wife, in truth continued through the following days, piling in drifts against the barn and turning the world into a study in white and gray. It was the kind of winter that could break the unprepared, but for the first time in years, Caleb felt ready for whatever the season brought. The ranch had been transformed in ways that went beyond the physical improvements. Yes, the new apple processing shed stood complete, its roof tight against the weather. Yes, the expanded herd grazed contentedly in the protected southern pasture, their breeding stock carefully selected for hardiness. Yes, the accounts showed profits that would have seemed impossible just months ago. But the real transformation was subtler, deeper. The ranch felt alive again, purposeful, like it had when his parents were both still living and the future stretched bright before them. Evelyn thrived in the winter months in ways Caleb hadn't anticipated. While the physical labor of ranching slowed with the snow, her business mind never rested. She spent long hours at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, developing what she called strategic plans for the coming year. She wrote to agricultural colleges requesting information on new farming techniques, corresponded with fruit merchants in Omaha and Denver, exploring markets for their apple products, even drafted a proposal for a cooperative buying arrangement with neighboring ranchers to get better prices on supplies. "You never stop, do you?" Caleb asked one evening, watching her work by lamplight, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Would you want me to?" She looked up with a slight smile. "Besides, winter is perfect for planning. We do the thinking now, execute in spring and summer, harvest the results in fall. It's a cycle, and every part matters." He moved behind her chair, massaging the tension from her shoulders. "What are you working on now?" "A proposal for Tom Hendricks. I think we should open an account with him for regular supply purchases. If we commit to buying exclusively through his store, he'll give us better prices. The savings over a year would be significant. Tom's already being generous with what he pays for our dried apples. Which is exactly why we should consolidate our business with him. Loyalty should flow both ways. He supports our products, we support his store. Everyone benefits." She leaned back into his hands with a contented sigh. "Besides, I like Tom. He's honest, which is rarer than it should be." Caleb bent to kiss the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, lavender soap and wood smoke, and something uniquely Evelyn. "Have I told you today that you're brilliant?" "Not since breakfast. I was starting to feel neglected." "Tragic. I'll have to remedy that immediately." He pulled her up from the chair, ignoring her laughing protests, and kissed her properly. Even after weeks of marriage, the taste of her still made his heart race. "Better?" "Much. Though now I've lost my place in these calculations." "Good. You need a break anyway." He guided her toward the fire, settling them both on the worn sofa his mother had insisted on buying 20 years ago. "Talk to me about something that isn't business. Tell me what you're thinking about." She was quiet for a moment, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. "I've been thinking about family, about what it means to build a legacy." "Because of your father?" "Partially. He built something he thought would last, and it collapsed because he didn't protect it properly. I don't want that for us. I want what we're creating here to survive beyond us, to mean something for generations." Caleb's hand found hers, lacing their fingers together. "That sounds like you're thinking long-term. Years and decades, not just seasons." "I am. This is home now, Caleb, not just for now but forever. I want to plant roots so deep nothing can tear them up." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I want children. I want to fill that second bedroom upstairs, maybe build another bedroom or two. I want to create the kind of family neither of us had, one where both parents are present, where children learn both practical skills and strategic thinking, where love and work exist together." His breath caught. They danced around this topic before, but hearing her say it so directly, with such clarity of purpose, made it real in a way it hadn't been. "When?" "I don't know. Soon, maybe. I'm 26, not getting younger, and I want time with them, want to teach them the way my father taught me." Her voice softened. "I want to give them what we lost, Caleb. Parents who are partners, who build together. Security that comes from smart planning, not just hard work. A legacy they can be proud of. What if I'm a terrible father? I barely remember mine in anything but work. He loved me, I know he did, but he showed it through teaching me ranching, not through words or affection. Then you'll be better than him. You're already more expressive, more willing to talk about feelings. You'll teach our children ranching because that's important, but you'll also tell them you love them, every day, multiple times. She smiled up at him. Besides, they'll have me. I'll make sure they understand business and strategy and how to spot a fraudulent loan clause at 50 paces. He laughed, pulling her closer. God help any banker who tries to cheat our children. God help our children if they inherit both your stubbornness and my need to be right about everything. They'll be unstoppable. Terrifying is more likely. But she was smiling, her eyes bright with a future she could see clearly. So, are we doing this? Trying for a family? Caleb thought about everything they'd built together in just a few short months. A struggling ranch transformed into a profitable operation. A marriage of convenience become a genuine partnership. Two damaged people finding healing in each other. It seemed impossible that something so good could keep growing, keep improving. But Evelyn had taught him to see possibilities instead of obstacles, to plan for success instead of merely trying to avoid failure. Yes, he said simply. Let's build that future together. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and he tasted hope on her lips. The winter months passed in a rhythm of work and planning and quiet domestic happiness. Caleb managed the daily ranch operations with help from the two hands they'd hired, capable men who knew cattle and didn't mind taking direction from a boss who was still learning. Evelyn ran the business side with increasing confidence, her natural talent for strategy making itself apparent in every decision. The partnership with Jameson proved profitable for both parties, his capital and connections opening markets they couldn't have accessed alone, while their quality products and efficient management impressed his other business associates. In February, 3 neighboring ranchers approached them about forming a cooperative. Evelyn had been right about the benefits of collective purchasing, and word had spread. She spent a week drafting articles of incorporation, bylaws, and operating procedures for what she called the Prairie Ranchers Alliance. The meeting to establish the cooperative took place in their expanded barn, 20 ranchers and their wives gathering to hear Evelyn explain how bulk purchasing and coordinated marketing could benefit everyone. We're small operations individually, she told the assembled group, standing at the front of the barn with diagrams she'd drawn showing cost savings. The big ranchers and farming consortiums can negotiate better prices because they buy in volume. But if we coordinate our purchases and pool our resources, we can negotiate the same way. 20 ranches buying feed together have the same leverage as one large operation. And what's to stop someone from taking the group's money and running? Asked John Miller, the farmer who sold them hay. We've all heard stories about cooperatives that failed because somebody got greedy. Oversight and transparency. Evelyn pulled out a thick folder of documents. Every purchase requires approval from a management committee elected by the members. All accounts are open for inspection by any member at any time. No single person controls the funds. We build in checks and balances that prevent fraud. Seems like a lot of trust to put in each other, another rancher said skeptically. It is, but you already trust each other in 100 small ways. You borrow tools, share labor during harvest, help when someone's sick or injured. This is just extending that cooperation to business matters. She paused, letting her gaze move across the group. I know trust is hard. My father's business partner betrayed him, destroyed everything he'd built. I understand the risk, but I also understand that isolation leaves us vulnerable. Together, we're stronger. The vulnerability in her admission seemed to shift something in the room. These were practical people who respected honesty and recognized pain when they heard it. They voted to establish the cooperative that evening, with Evelyn unanimously elected as the first managing secretary. Caleb watched her accept the position with grace and determination, and his chest swelled with pride. On the ride home, she was quiet, her hands folded in her lap. "What are you thinking?" he asked. That my father would have been proud. He always believed in cooperative economics, in people working together for mutual benefit. I wish he could have seen this. He sees it. Caleb reached for her hand. And he's proud. I'm sure of it. She squeezed his fingers, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. Spring arrived with the usual mix of mud and hope, the prairie transforming from brown to green almost overnight. Evelyn threw herself into orchard work with enthusiasm that made Caleb nervous, climbing ladders to prune high branches despite his protests. "I'm perfectly capable of trimming trees," she insisted from 10 feet up. "I know you are, but you're also possibly pregnant, and I'd rather not take chances." She paused, pruning shears in hand, and looked down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What makes you think I might be pregnant?" "You've been tired lately, and you were sick 2 mornings this week." "Could be anything. Bad meat? Weather changes?" "Could be. Or it could be a baby." He held the ladder steady, looking up at her. "Have you considered it?" "Every day for the past 3 weeks." She climbed down carefully, and when she reached the ground, she took his hands. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But yes, I think I am. Pregnant, I mean. I'm almost certain." The world seemed to tilt and resettle, everything suddenly sharper, more vivid. "When?" "Late October, maybe early November. I can't be precise, but that's my best guess." Caleb did the math quickly. A baby born in fall after harvest, when they'd have time to adjust before winter's isolation. It was perfect timing, though he knew Evelyn well enough to suspect she'd calculated that intentionally. "How do you feel about it?" he asked carefully. "Terrified. Excited. Completely unprepared despite all my planning." She laughed shakily. "I've been reading everything I can find about pregnancy and childbirth, making lists of supplies we'll need, calculating how this affects our labor distribution for the next year. But none of that changes the fact that I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together, just like everything else." "What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I'm too focused on business, too driven, too—" He kissed her, stopping the spiral of worry. "You're going to be an amazing mother. You're brilliant and fierce, and you fight for what matters, and nothing will matter more to you than our child." "Our child." She said it wonderingly, like she was testing how it felt. "That's real now, isn't it? We're creating a family." "We are, and that family is going to be extraordinary." They stood in the orchard, surrounded by trees they'd rehabilitated together. On land they'd saved together and held each other while the future took shape around them. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Evelyn chafed at the restrictions it imposed. Caleb had to physically prevent her from climbing to the barn loft to check on apple storage, from riding out to inspect cattle, from doing the 100 physical tasks she considered essential. They compromised. She could handle accounts and planning, could supervise operations from the ground, could even do light work in the garden she'd revived from his mother's original plantings. But anything risky was forbidden. "You're being overprotective," she complained in May, watching him repair fence while she was relegated to sitting in the shade with paperwork. "You're being reckless. There's a difference. I'm pregnant, not dying. Women have babies while doing far more strenuous work. Not my wife. Not with my child." He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Humor me, Evelyn, please. I lost my mother when I was 16. I'm not losing you." Her expression softened immediately. She stood carefully, navigating around her growing belly, and came to him. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm too stubborn to die and too competitive to let pregnancy slow me down more than absolutely necessary. But I hear you. I'll be more careful." "Thank you. Though I maintain that you're being ridiculous." Noted and ignored. She laughed and kissed his cheek, and they went back to their respective tasks, the easy rhythm of partnership continuing despite the changes to come. In July, Evelyn received a letter that made her cry. Happy tears this time. The Boston Bar Association had officially cleared her father's name and was establishing the Jonathan Hart Memorial Scholarship for young people pursuing careers in ethical business practice. They wanted Evelyn to serve on the selection committee, to help choose recipients who embodied her father's values. "They want me to come to Boston for the dedication ceremony," she said, reading the letter for the 3rd time. "In September. That's right around when the baby's due." "I know. I'll have to decline." But she sounded disappointed, and Caleb understood why. This was vindication, her father's legacy being honored instead of tarnished. Missing it would hurt. "Write and explain the situation. Ask if they can wait until spring, or if they can send representatives here." Maybe they'd be willing to hold a Western ceremony. In Ashford Creek? She looked skeptical. It's hardly Boston. No, but it's where you are, where you've built something real using the principles your father taught you. That matters, Evelyn. If they really want to honor his legacy, they should honor it where his daughter is carrying it forward. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. When did you get so wise? I married brilliance. It's rubbing off. Flatterer. But she looked pleased, and when she wrote her response that evening, she proposed exactly what Caleb had suggested. A dedication ceremony in Nebraska, where Eastern officials could see firsthand what ethical business practices looked like in frontier communities. To everyone's surprise, they agreed. August brought intense heat and the final preparations for both harvest and baby. The apple crop was extraordinary, triple what they'd harvested the previous fall, just as Evelyn had predicted. She organized a processing operation that employed 6 women from town, creating jobs and goodwill while efficiently handling the volume of fruit. The dried apple business had grown beyond anything they'd imagined, with standing orders from merchants in 4 territories. We need to think about expansion, Evelyn said one evening, reviewing production numbers. At this rate, we'll outgrow the current shed by next year. We should build a proper facility, maybe even look into canning equipment. Can you stop planning the business for 5 minutes and focus on the fact that you're about to have a baby? I can do both. Multitasking is my particular skill. But she shifted uncomfortably, her hand on her swollen belly. Though I admit this is getting increasingly difficult. How do women do this multiple times? Very carefully, and with supportive husbands who tell them to rest. Your subtle suggestions are noted. She stood with effort, stretching her back. Walk with me? The baby's active tonight, and movement helps. They walked slowly around the house in the cooling evening air, Evelyn's hand on Caleb's arm for support. The ranch spread out around them in the golden light of sunset, fields ready for harvest, cattle dotting the pastures, buildings maintained and purposeful. It looked prosperous, established, nothing like the struggling operation Caleb had been desperately trying to save less than a year ago. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Evelyn asked quietly. If I hadn't answered your advertisement? If I'd chosen a different agency, a different man? Every day. And every day I'm grateful you chose this, chose me. I almost didn't, you know. I had 3 other responses to my inquiry. One was from a school teacher in California, one from a merchant in Kansas, one from a doctor in Oregon. All of them sounded safer, more established, more likely to provide security. Caleb's heart clenched. Why did you choose Nebraska? Choose a struggling rancher over more comfortable options? Because your letter was honest. The others promised comfort and security, painted rosy pictures of what life would be like. But you told the truth. You said it would be hard work, that the ranch needed help, that you were looking for a capable partner. Something about that honesty called to me. I was so tired of lies and pretense. I wanted real, even if real was difficult. You got difficult in spades. I got partnership, purpose, love. She stopped walking, turning to face him. I got everything I needed, even if I didn't know I needed it. You gave me that, Caleb, a reason to stop running and start building. We gave each other that. He rested his hand on her belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm. And now we're giving it to this little one, a foundation built on honesty and hard work and love. That's a legacy worth leaving. The best legacy. She covered his hand with hers. I think my father would approve. Of you, of this life, of the family we're creating. He always said that true wealth was measured in relationships and purpose, not money. We have both. They stood there as the sun set. 2 people who'd found each other in desperation and built something extraordinary from that unlikely beginning. Labor started on a cool September morning, 3 weeks before the dedication ceremony was scheduled. Evelyn woke Caleb before dawn, her face calm but her grip on his hand painfully tight. It's time. He dressed in a panic, fumbling with buttons and dropping his boots twice. Evelyn watched with amused patience, breathing through contractions while he ran around like a startled rabbit. Caleb, breathe. We have time. How can you be so calm? Because panic won't help. Now go get Mrs. Matthews. She's agreed to act as midwife. The next 12 hours were the longest of Caleb's life. He was relegated to pacing downstairs while Mrs. Matthews and two other experienced mothers attended Evelyn. Occasionally, he'd hear sounds from upstairs that made his heart stop, but Mrs. Matthews kept shooing him away when he tried to intervene. "First babies take time," she said kindly but firmly. "Your wife is strong and healthy. She's doing fine. Now stop wearing a path in your floorboards and make yourself useful. Boil more water, prepare clean linens, anything but hovering at the bottom of those stairs." Caleb tried to work, but concentration was impossible. He checked on the horses 3 times, reorganized the barn twice, and was contemplating his 4th trip to the well when he heard it, a thin, angry wail that crescendoed into sustained crying. He was up the stairs before conscious thought, bursting into the bedroom to find Evelyn propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. Mrs. Matthews was cleaning up, smiling at his entrance. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You have a daughter." A daughter. Caleb approached slowly, almost reverently, staring at the impossibly small person in Evelyn's arms. She had a shock of dark hair and a furious red face, her tiny fists waving as she protested her abrupt entrance into the world. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's loud," Evelyn corrected, but her voice was full of wonder. "Here, meet your daughter." He took the baby carefully, terrified he'd break her, but she settled in his arms like she belonged there. She stopped crying, her eyes, dark and unfocused, seeming to study his face. Something in his chest cracked open, a love so intense it was almost painful flooding through him. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father, and I promise you, every day of your life, that I'll keep you safe and loved and teach you everything I know. Don't forget to mention she'll also learn business strategy and financial management," Evelyn added with a tired smile. "That too. You're going to be brilliant and fierce, just like your mother, and stubborn and hardworking, just like your father. God help us all." They named her Sarah, after Caleb's mother, with the middle name Joanna for Evelyn's father. Sarah Joanna Rowan entered the world with an attitude and a set of lungs that suggested she'd inherited her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness in equal measure. The dedication ceremony took place 3 weeks later, with Evelyn still recovering but determined to participate. Representatives from the Boston Bar Association traveled west, along with several of her father's former colleagues who wanted to show their respect. The ceremony was held in the town hall, with most of Ashford Creek turning out to witness the occasion. Jonathan Hart was honored posthumously for his integrity and ethical business practices. The scholarship was formally established with Evelyn named as permanent committee chair. And then, in a surprise that made Evelyn weep, they presented the first scholarship to a young woman from Ashford Creek itself, the daughter of one of the ranchers in the cooperative Evelyn had established. "Your father believed that ethical business could thrive anywhere," the association president said, addressing the crowd. "His daughter has proven that belief here in Nebraska, building partnerships and prosperity that benefit entire communities. This scholarship will help others follow that example, whether in Boston boardrooms or frontier ranches. That's the legacy Jonathan Hart deserves." After the ceremony, the Boston representatives toured the ranch at Evelyn's invitation. They saw the orchards, the processing shed, the cooperative buying program documentation, the detailed financial records that showed sustainable growth and fair practices. They spoke with neighboring ranchers who praised Evelyn's honesty and strategic insight. By the time they left, they were talking about using the Rowan Ranch as a case study in ethical business practices for their educational programs. "Your father would be proud," one of them told Evelyn as they prepared to depart. "You've honored his legacy in the best possible way, by living his principles, not just talking about them." After they left, Caleb found Evelyn in the nursery, holding Sarah and looking out the window at the ranch spread below them. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Better than all right. This is closure, Caleb. My father's name is cleared, his work is honored, and his granddaughter will grow up knowing he was a good man who was wronged. That's everything I hoped for when I left Boston. You've done more than clear his name. You've built something he'd be amazed by." "We built it, together." She looked up at him, baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I came here running from disgrace, desperate for any escape. I found purpose instead. A partner who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. A home that's ours, earned through our own work. A daughter who will inherit not just land and money, but principles and partnership. That's more than I dreamed possible. Caleb wrapped his arms around them both, his wife and daughter, his heart so full it ached. I asked for a capable woman to help save a failing ranch. I got a brilliant partner who saved me instead. We saved each other. That's what partners do. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the prairie gold. The apple orchard stood healthy and productive. The processing shed hummed with activity. The cattle grazed contentedly in expanding pastures. The ranch his father had built and nearly lost was thriving again, transformed by intelligence and determination and love into something greater than it had been. But the real transformation was subtler, more profound. Where there had been loneliness, there was now partnership. Where there had been desperation, there was now hope. Where there had been mere survival, there was now purpose and legacy and a future that stretched bright before them. As winter approached again, the Rowan Ranch prepared for its second season under Evelyn's management. The cooperative had grown to include 28 ranches. The apple business had expanded beyond anyone's projections. Plans were underway for spring plantings that would diversify their crops further. And in the nursery upstairs, Sarah Joanna Rowan slept peacefully, unaware that she was heir to more than land and money. She was heir to her grandfather's integrity, her father's determination, and her mother's brilliant strategic mind. On a cold December evening, Caleb found Evelyn at the kitchen table as usual, though tonight she wasn't working on accounts. Instead, she was writing a letter, her handwriting careful and considered. "Who are you writing to?" he asked, bringing her tea. "Sarah, for when she's older." She looked up, her eyes soft. "I'm documenting how this all began. The advertisement, the desperate letters, arriving in Ashford Creek knowing nothing about ranching or frontier life. I want her to know that sometimes the best things come from the scariest decisions. That taking risks when you have nothing to lose can lead to gaining everything that matters." That's beautiful. I also want her to know that her grandfather was a good man who made one mistake in trusting the wrong person, but that mistake doesn't define him. His integrity does. His kindness does. His belief in using business as a force for good does. She set down the pen. I'm giving her the truth, Caleb. Not a sanitized story, but the real, messy, complicated truth. She deserves that. She deserves you. Both of you. He kissed her temple. And she's lucky to have parents who'll teach her that truth matters more than comfort, that partnership is stronger than independence, that love and business aren't opposites, but complements. That's assuming we don't ruin her with our combined stubbornness. Please, she'll be unstoppable. Evelyn laughed, and the sound filled the warm kitchen like music. Caleb settled beside her, reading over her shoulder as she continued writing to their daughter. The letter was honest and hopeful, acknowledging both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. It was, he thought, very much like Evelyn herself, brilliant and brave and absolutely refusing to pretend things were simpler than they were. Later that night, after they'd checked on Sarah one final time and climbed into bed together, Evelyn curled against Caleb's side in the darkness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For writing that advertisement. For being honest enough to attract someone running from dishonesty. For seeing me as a partner when you could have seen me as just a solution to a problem. For loving me even when I was too scared to admit I loved you back. Thank you for answering. For staying when you could have run. For fighting to save something that wasn't even yours yet. For teaching me that there's more than one way to be strong." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind outside and the small sounds of their daughter sleeping in the next room. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen one of the other advertisements?" Evelyn asked. "The doctor or the teacher or the merchant?" "Every day. And every day I'm grateful you didn't." "Me too. I got exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know what that was when I started. I got you, this ranch, Sarah, a purpose that matters and work that means something. I got home. We both did. And in the darkness of the Nebraska night, wrapped around each other in a bed that had seen them through crisis and triumph, desperation and love, Caleb and Evelyn Rowan held each other and counted themselves blessed, not because their path had been easy. It hadn't. Not because they'd avoided all pain. They'd both carried scars into their marriage. but because they'd found in each other exactly what they needed to heal and grow and build something lasting. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with hidden talents had saved more than a struggling ranch. She'd saved herself, and in doing so, she'd saved the man desperate enough to send for a stranger, brave enough to trust her judgment, wise enough to recognize a partner when fate delivered one to his doorstep. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the ranch in white. But inside, in the warmth they'd created together, the future was bright with possibility. A daughter who'd learned both ranching and business. A cooperative that would grow to include dozens of operations. An orchard that would produce for generations. And most importantly, a partnership built on honesty and respect and love that would weather whatever storms came their way. The Rowan Ranch had been saved, not by a miracle, but by hard work and strategic thinking and two people refusing to give up on themselves or each other. It was a better salvation for being earned rather than given, lasting rather than temporary. And as Caleb drifted toward sleep, Evelyn's warmth against his side and his daughter's soft breathing audible through the walls, he thought about the advertisement he'd written in desperate hope so many months ago. He'd asked for a capable woman to share a life of hard work and honest reward. He'd gotten that and so much more. A brilliant partner, a fierce protector, a loving wife, a devoted mother. He'd gotten everything he needed and much that he'd never dared to dream of wanting. The ranch would prosper in the years to come, growing beyond what his father had built into something genuinely remarkable. The cooperative would become a model for other communities. The apple orchards would make the Rowan name synonymous with quality. Sarah would grow up learning both the practical skills of ranching and the strategic thinking of business, would eventually take over operations and expand them further, would build on the foundation her parents had laid. But all of that was still to come. Tonight, in this moment, there was only the warmth of family, the satisfaction of work well done, and the bone-deep contentment of knowing they'd built something real and lasting together. Evelyn shifted in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible, and Caleb pulled her closer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new work to be done. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. That had always been enough. The mail-order bride had arrived with hidden talents and desperate secrets. She'd saved a struggling ranch and found redemption in the process. But more than that, she'd found home. Not in a place, but in partnership, in purpose, in love that was chosen rather than convenient. And in the end, that was the greatest salvation of all.